Shadow of the Throne, the secret order that changed the age of revolutions. France, 1789. They tell you the French Revolution was born of hunger and enlightenment, of bread riots and philosophical salons, of the people rising against tyranny. They are not entirely wrong, but they do not tell you about us, the ones who stoked those fires, who whispered in the right ears, who turned grievance into rage and rage into revolution. They do not tell you about the Brute Brotherhood, because we made certain they never would. I am writing this in exile, an old man whose name has been erased from every record that once bore it. I was there when the Bastille fell. I was there when the king lost his head. I was there when the terror consumed its own children, and I watched as the revolution we had so carefully orchestrated devoured everyone who touched it, including us. This is not a confession. It is a warning, because the Brotherhood did not die with guillotine. It merely learned to wear new masks. The year was 1784, and I was nobody. My name was Jean-Baptiste Mercier, though that identity means nothing now. I was 26 years old, a clerk in the office of the Controller General of Finances, buried so deep in the bureaucracy of Versailles that even my immediate superior could not remember my face. I translated correspondence, copied ledgers, filed reports that documented the slow financial collapse of the French monarchy. I was invisible, which is to say I was perfectly positioned. I had been raised in Lyon, the son of a silk merchant who died bankrupt when I was 15. My mother sold what remained and sent me to Paris with enough money for a year of education and a letter of introduction to a distant cousin who worked in the royal administration. I learned quickly that intelligence without connections was worthless at Versailles, that brilliance without birth condemned you to obscurity. I watched mediocre men rise on the strength of their names, while I remained trapped in a windowless office surrounded by the evidence of a kingdom bleeding to death. France was dying. Anyone with eyes could see it. The American War had drained the treasury. Crop failures had driven up bread prices. The nobility refused to pay taxes while the peasantry starved. And yet the court danced on, oblivious or indifferent, while men like me documented the catastrophe in meticulous detail that no one would ever read. I was angry. I was ambitious. I was powerless, and that made me perfect. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in March, slipped between the pages of a budget report I was reviewing. No seal, no signature, only a symbol I had never seen before. A broken crown wrapped in chains drawn in ink the color of dried blood. Inside, a single line in Latin, Libertas per scientist, liberty through knowledge. Below it, an address in the Marais and a time. Nothing more. I should have reported it. I should have burned it. Instead, I went. The address led to a printing shop on the Rue des Rosiers, shuttered and dark. I arrived at midnight. As instructed, my heart was hammering against my ribs. The door was unlocked. Inside, the smell of ink and paper, and 4 others waiting in the shadows. We did not speak. We did not introduce ourselves. We simply stood there, strangers bound by curiosity and something more dangerous, the hunger for significance. Then she arrived. I had expected a man, someone like the faceless bureaucrats I worked with, but the figure who emerged from the back room was a woman of perhaps 40, dressed in the plain dark clothing of a bourgeois widow. Her hair was pulled back severely, her face unremarkable except for her eyes, which held the cold certainty of someone who had seen empires rise and fall and understand the mechanisms of both. "You are here because you have been chosen," she said, her voice low and precise. "Not for your birth, not for your wealth, but for your position. You are invisible. You are overlooked. You are underestimated, and that makes you invaluable." She moved through the room like a professor addressing students, hands clasped behind her back. The world is changing. The old order, the divine right of kings, the privileges of nobility, the authority of the church, is collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions. Enlightenment has given us the tools to understand this collapse. But understanding is not enough. We must guide it. We must ensure that what rises from the ashes is not chaos, but a new order built on reason, merit, and the systematic application of power. One of the others, a young man with the ink-stained fingers of a printer, spoke up. "Who are you? What organization do you represent?" The woman smiled, a thin expression that did not reach her eyes. "We have no name that you would recognize. We have existed in various forms since the fall of Constantinople, adapting to each age, embedding ourselves in the institutions that shape history. Some have called us the Brotherhood, though we are not exclusively men. Others have called us conspirators, which is closer to the truth. We prefer to think of ourselves as architects, designers of the future that the masses will inherit without ever knowing we built it. She gestured to the printing press behind her, its metal frame gleaming in the candlelight. This press has printed pamphlets that toppled ministers. It has published treatises that changed laws. It has spread ideas that will reshape nations. And the man who owns it has no idea what it has truly been used for, because we pay him well and ask no questions. That is how we operate. We do not storm palaces. We do not lead armies. We plant seeds. We nurture grievances. We amplify contradictions. And when the time is right, we watch as the world tears apart and rebuilds according to our design. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold March air. This was not politics as I understood it, the petty maneuvering of courtiers and ministers. This was something else entirely. This was power stripped of pretense, ideology weaponized, history itself treated as raw material to be shaped. "What do you want from us?" I asked. My voice was steadier than I felt. The woman turned her gaze on me, and I had the unsettling sensation of being dissected, every weakness and ambition laid bare. "Loyalty," she said, "discretion, patience, and above all, the willingness to act when called upon. You will continue your work as before. You will attract no attention, but when we need information, you will provide it. When we need a document delayed or altered, you will do so. When we need an idea planted or a rumor spread, you will be our instrument. In return, you will be part of something greater than yourself. You will help build the future." "And if we refuse?" the printer asked. "Then you will leave this shop and forget you were ever here. But know this. We have been watching you for months, perhaps years. We know your debts, your ambitions, your resentments. If you walk away, you will spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been. And we will find someone else." The choice was not really a choice at all. One by one we knelt. One by one we swore the oath, words in French this time, but ancient in their cadence, speaking of liberty and enlightenment and the sacred duty to guide humanity toward reason. The woman cut our palms with a small blade, and we pressed our bleeding hands together, mingling our blood. It was theatrical, almost absurd, but in that moment, it felt like destiny. "You are no longer who you were," the woman said. "You are instruments of the Brotherhood. You are the invisible hand. You are the architects of the Age of Reason." And so it began. The first months were anticlimactic. I received no further contact, no instructions, no acknowledgement that the oath had even happened. I began to wonder if it had all been an elaborate test or a delusion brought on by too many late nights reading radical pamphlets. But then subtly, things began to change. A memorandum would arrive on my desk, unsigned, suggesting I pay particular attention to a certain minister's correspondence. A colleague would mention, seemingly in passing, that a particular financial report might benefit from a slight delay in processing. A document would be misfiled, finding its way to my hands when it should have gone to someone 3 levels above me. I began to see the patterns. I began to understand. The Brotherhood was not a single organization, but a network, a web of individuals scattered across Paris, across France, across Europe, each operating independently, yet all working toward the same goal. We were clerks and printers, merchants and lawyers, tutors and physicians. We were the people no one noticed, and that made us indispensable. My first real assignment came 6 months after the oath. The woman, I would later learn to call her Madame Corday, though that was certainly not her real name, sent word through a coded message hidden in a shipment of paper. I was to ensure that a particular financial reform proposed by the Comptroller General would fail to reach the King's desk in time for the upcoming Assembly of Notables. It was absurdly simple. I merely misfiled the document, burying it under a stack of routine correspondence. By the time it was discovered, the Assembly had already rejected the reform package, and the Comptroller General had been dismissed in disgrace. The King, desperate for revenue, was forced to call the Estates General for the first time in over a century. I had changed the course of French history with nothing more than bureaucratic incompetence. That was when I truly understood the Brotherhood's power. We did not need armies or assassinations. We did not need to overthrow the king or storm the Bastille. We simply needed to be in the right place, at the right time, with the right piece of information, the right delay, the right whisper. We were the butterfly's wings that caused the hurricane. Over the next 3 years, I rose within the Brotherhood's ranks. I was given more responsibility, more autonomy. I recruited others, a banker who managed noble accounts, a priest who heard confessions at Versailles, a seamstress who worked in the Queen's household. Each one carefully chosen, each one sworn to secrecy, each one a new thread in the web. But I also began to see the cost. The financial crisis we had helped engineers starve the poor. The political paralysis we had encouraged was radicalizing moderates. The pamphlets we had printed and distributed were not just spreading enlightenment, they were spreading rage. I told myself it was necessary that we were midwives to a new age, that the old order had to be destroyed before the new could be built. But I began to wonder, what exactly were we building? I met the others in my cell only once more before the revolution began, in a cellar beneath a wine merchant's shop in Faubourg Saint-Antoine. There were perhaps 30 of us now, drawn from across Paris. Madame Corday presided, older and grayer, but no less commanding. "You have done well," she told us. "The Estates General will convene in May. The Third Estate will demand representation. The nobility will refuse, and when they do, the people will rise. We have planted seeds. We have nurtured grievances. We have amplified every contradiction in the system. Now we will watch as it tears apart." She unveiled a map of Paris, marked with symbols and notations that meant nothing to most of us, but everything to those who understood. "This is the future," she said. "A France governed not by divine right, but by reason. A society organized not by birth, but by merit. A nation that will serve as a model for all of Europe. Kings will fall, but we will endure. Because we are not bound to any throne, any estate, any tradition. We are bound only to each other and to the vision of a world governed by enlightened principles." It was a seductive vision. It was also a lie. I did not realize it then, but the Brotherhood was not building a republic of virtue. It was building a republic that served the Brotherhood. Every crisis we engineered, every reform we sabotaged, every radical we empowered, all served to concentrate power in our hands. We were not liberators. We were architects of a new tyranny, one more insidious because it wore the mask of reason. But that realization would come later. For now, I was still a believer. I still thought we were the enlightened ones, the ones who understood history's direction and had the courage to guide it. I was wrong. The turning point came in July 1789. The Estates General had transformed itself into the National Assembly. The king had dismissed his reformist minister and was rumored to be massing troops around Paris. Bread prices had reached crisis levels. The city was a powder keg, and we had spent years piling on the gunpowder. I was tasked with observing the situation in Faubourg Saint-Antoine, the working-class district where unrest was most acute. Everything I saw there changed. I saw families starving, children with distended bellies and hollow eyes. I saw men desperate enough to riot not for political principles, but for bread. I saw women who had sold everything they owned and still could not feed their families. And I knew that we had done this. Not the king, not the nobility, not even the harvest failures. Us, the Brotherhood. We had engineered the financial crisis. We had blocked reforms that might have eased the suffering. We had spread pamphlets blaming the aristocracy while ensuring that no practical solutions reached implementation. We had turned economic hardship into political rage, and now people were going to die for it. On July 14th, the crowd stormed the Bastille. I was not there, but I heard the reports. 7 prisoners freed, the governor's head paraded on a pike, the ancient fortress reduced to rubble by a mob armed with stolen weapons. The Brotherhood celebrated. Madame Corday called it the birth of the new age. I called it murder. I wrote my report as instructed, documenting the strategic implications, the shift in power dynamics, the opportunities for further manipulation, but I did not include what I felt. I could not. To express doubt within the Brotherhood was to invite suspicion, and suspicion was a death sentence. So I buried it. I told myself it was necessary. I told myself it was for the greater good. I told myself the lie we all told ourselves, that we were building something better. But doubt remained, a seed planted in the blood-soaked streets of Paris. And over time it would grow. For now, though, I was still one of them. Still a brother. Still bound by the oath. Still invisible. Still powerful. Still damned. The revolution had begun, and we had made it happen. But revolutions, I would learn, have a way of consuming their creators. The Brotherhood thought it could control the storm. We were about to discover that some forces, once unleashed, cannot be controlled at all. And the price of that lesson would be paid in blood, ours and everyone else's. The Brotherhood operated on principles that seemed contradictory until you understood their deeper logic. We were a hierarchy without formal ranks, an organization without official structure, a conspiracy that thrived on independence. Each member operated in isolation, receiving instructions through coded messages, dead drops, and intermediaries. We rarely met face to face. We never used real names outside of our cells. And yet somehow we moved as one. The method was elegant in its simplicity. Madame Corday, or whoever she truly was, served as a node in a larger network. She received instructions from someone higher, though I never learned who. She transmitted those instructions to us, tailored to our specific positions and capabilities. We executed them without knowing the full picture, without understanding how our individual actions fit into the larger design. It was compartmentalization perfectly, a system that could survive the exposure or elimination of any single member because no one knew enough to compromise the whole. In the months following the fall of the Bastille, my role expanded significantly. The National Assembly was now the de facto government of France, and the Brotherhood had members embedded throughout its committees and working groups. My position in the financial bureaucracy, once merely useful, became critical. I had access to budget documents, tax records, debt schedules, all the financial machinery that kept the new government functioning or failing to function. My handler during this period was a man I knew only as Rousseau, though he bore no resemblance to the philosopher. He was perhaps 50, with the weathered face of someone who had spent years in the provinces before coming to Paris. He claimed to be a lawyer from Bordeaux, but I suspected his true background was far more complex. He had the manner of someone who had killed before and would do so again without hesitation. We met once a month in a different location each time: a tavern in the Latin Quarter, a bookshop near the Palais Royal, a church in Montmartre. He would arrive first, establishing that we were not being followed, and then give me my instructions. They were always specific, always limited in scope, and always designed to achieve an effect I could only partially understand. The Assembly is debating the nationalization of church property, Rousseau told me in September 1789, as we sat in a café near the Tuileries. There is a proposal to issue paper currency backed by these properties, assignats. You will ensure that the financial projections supporting this proposal are optimistic. I understood immediately. Paper currency not backed by gold or silver was inherently unstable. If the projections were too optimistic, if they underestimated the inflationary pressure, the assignats would eventually collapse. And when they did, the resulting economic chaos would destabilize the entire revolutionary government. You want me to sabotage the currency? I asked quietly. Rousseau smiled. I want you to ensure that the Assembly makes an informed decision based on the best available data. If that data happens to be flawed, well, these are chaotic times. Mistakes are inevitable. This will impoverish millions, I said. This will create the conditions for true transformation, Rousseau corrected. The old order must be completely destroyed before the new can be built. Half measures will only prolong the suffering. We are surgeons, Jean-Baptiste. Sometimes amputation is necessary to save the patient. I did as I was told. I altered the projections, inflating the expected value of church properties and underestimating the amount of currency that would need to be printed. The Assembly, desperate for revenue and eager to strike at the church, approved the plan. Within 2 years, the assignats would lose half their value. Within 4 years, they would be worthless, and the resulting economic collapse would help pave the way for the Terror. I had condemned France to hyperinflation with a few strokes of my pen. But I also began to keep my own records. In a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards of my rented room, I started documenting everything. The instructions I received, the operations I executed, the names and descriptions of other Brotherhood members I encountered. I told myself it was insurance, a way to protect myself if the Brotherhood ever turned on me. But it was also something else, evidence, test, the beginning of this very account. Because even then, even as I continued to serve, I was beginning to understand that the Brotherhood's vision of enlightened rule was a fantasy. We were not building a republic of virtue. We were building a republic of manipulation, where power would be concentrated in the hands of those who understood how to pull the strings while remaining invisible. The revolution was not liberating France. It was simply changing who held the leash. In October 1789, the Women's March on Versailles forced the king and queen to return to Paris, effectively making them prisoners of the revolution. The Brotherhood had helped organize the march, spreading rumors of hoarded grain and royal plots, ensuring that the crowd's anger would be directed at the monarchy rather than at the assembly or the economic crisis. I watched from a distance as thousands of women, armed with pikes and kitchen knives, marched through the rain to Versailles and dragged the royal family back to the Tuileries Palace. It was a triumph of manipulation. It was also a preview of the violence to come. I noticed other members of the Brotherhood in the revolutionary crowds. A printer I had recruited was now publishing Marat's radical newspaper. The seamstress from the Queen's household had become an informant for the Jacobin Club. The priest who had heard confessions at Versailles was now a constitutional clergyman, preaching the gospel of reason from a deconsecrated church. We were everywhere, and we won. But winning what exactly? The revolution was spiraling beyond anyone's control. The assembly was paralyzed by factionalism. The king was a prisoner. The provinces were in open revolt. And the Brotherhood's response was to accelerate the chaos, to push harder, to ensure that the old order was destroyed. I began to wonder if we had ever truly been in control, or if we had simply convinced ourselves that we were guiding forces that were, in fact, guiding us. In December 1789, I was summoned to a meeting of the full Paris cell. All 30 of us, gathered in the same cellar where we had met before the Bastille fell. Madame Corday presided, but there was a new figure beside her, a younger man, perhaps 35, with the intense eyes of a true believer and the cold smile of a fanatic. "This is Gregor," Madame Corday said. "He represents the Brotherhood's interests in the Assembly and the Jacobin Club. He will be coordinating our efforts as we move into the next phase." Gregor stepped forward, and I felt an immediate sense of unease. There was something different about him, something more ruthless than even Rousseau's calculated pragmatism. "The revolution has succeeded beyond our expectations," Gregor said, his voice carrying the fervor of a preacher. "But success brings new challenges. The moderates in the Assembly want to stop here. Constitutional monarchy, limited reforms, preservation of property rights. This is unacceptable. We did not tear down the old order to replace it with a slightly modified version of the same tyranny." He began to pace, his energy filling the small space. "We must push further. We must radicalize the revolution. The king must be eliminated, not as a person, but as an institution. Nobility must be destroyed, not reformed. The church must be abolished, not merely subordinated. And those who resist, whether royalists or moderates, must be swept aside." I felt a chill. This was not the language of enlightened reform. This was the language of purge and terror. "Some of you may have doubts," Gregor continued, his gaze sweeping across us. "You may think we have gone far enough, that the violence is excessive, that we should consolidate our gains. But history does not reward the timid. The Brotherhood has survived for centuries because we understand that true transformation requires ruthlessness. We are not here to make the world comfortable. We are here to remake it." Madame Corday nodded in agreement, and I realized with growing horror that the Brotherhood was fracturing. There had always been tension between those who saw the revolution to an end, a stable, rational republic, and those who saw it as an end in itself, a permanent revolution that would continually purge and renew society. Gregor represented the latter faction, and he was winning. After the meeting, Rousseau pulled me aside. "Be careful," he said quietly. "Gregor and his faction are dangerous. They believe in their own rhetoric. They think they can control the terror they're about to unleash." "Can't they?" I asked. Rousseau's expression was grim. "No one controls the terror. It consumes everyone it touches, perpetrators and victims alike. The Brotherhood has survived by staying in the shadows, by manipulating events without being caught up in them. Gregor wants us to step into the light, to become active participants in the purges. That way lies destruction. Then why don't you stop him? Because I'm not sure he's wrong, Rousseau admitted. Perhaps the only way to truly transform society is to burn it down completely. Perhaps moderation is just cowardice dressed up as wisdom. I don't know anymore, Jean-Baptiste. I don't know if any of us do. That conversation haunted me. If even Rousseau, the most calculating and pragmatic member I knew, was uncertain, then the Brotherhood had lost its way. We were no longer architects of the future. We were arsonists, setting fires we could not control and hoping we would survive the inferno. Over the next year, I watched the revolution radicalized exactly as Gregor had predicted. The king attempted to flee and was captured at Varennes, destroying what little legitimacy he had left. The Assembly declared war on Austria, plunging France into a conflict that would consume the next 2 decades. The Jacobins seized control of the government, and the moderates were purged or fled. And through it all, the Brotherhood was there, whispering in the right ears, planting the right ideas, ensuring that every crisis pushed the revolution further to the left. I continued to serve. I continued to execute my assignments. But I also continued to document everything, filling page after page with evidence of what we had done and what we were becoming. Because I had begun to understand something that Madame Corday and Gregor either did not see or did not care about. The revolution was not just consuming the old order. It was consuming us, every member of the Brotherhood who stepped into the light, who took an active role in the revolutionary government, was marked. And marked people in revolutionary France had a way of ending up on the scaffold. The Brotherhood thought it could ride the tiger. I was beginning to suspect the tiger was going to eat us all. In August 1792, the mob stormed the Tuileries Palace, massacred the Swiss guards, and imprisoned the royal family. The monarchy was effectively abolished. The revolution had entered a new phase, one where violence was not an unfortunate necessity, but a celebrated virtue. I was there not as a participant, but as an observer, documenting the carnage for the Brotherhood. I watched as men, women, and children were cut down by pike and musket. I watched as the palace was looted and burned. I watched as the revolution I had helped create revealed its true face. And I decided I would continue to serve the Brotherhood, but I would also prepare for the day when I would have to run. Because the revolution was a fire, and fires eventually burn out. And when they do, they leave nothing but ash and the charred bones of everyone who got too close. I was going to survive. Whatever it took, whoever I had to betray, I was going to survive. And then I was going to tell the truth. The weeks following my first assignment were a study in psychological manipulation. The Brotherhood did not simply give orders and expect obedience. It cultivated dependency, created a sense of belonging, made you feel that you were part of something extraordinary. Madame Corday arranged for me to meet other members of my cell, always in different locations, always with different combinations of people. I began to understand the structure. Cells of 5 to 7 members, each with a specific handler, each operating independently, but coordinated through a network I could only partially perceive. One of my cell members was a woman named Elise, perhaps 30 years old, who worked as a governess in the household of a prominent noble family. She had access to private conversations, family secrets, political maneuverings that never made it to official correspondence. Another was Claude, a wine merchant whose business took him across France and into the German states, allowing him to carry messages and observe economic conditions that the government's official reports missed. There was also Father Bertrand, a priest who heard confessions from courtiers and ministers, who knew every scandal, every affair, every financial indiscretion in Versailles. We were, collectively, a surveillance apparatus more comprehensive than anything the king's police could have assembled. And we were invisible. Our meetings followed a pattern. Madame Corday would arrive last, always watching to ensure we had not been followed. She would ask each of us to report what we had learned, what opportunities we had identified, what vulnerabilities we had observed. Then she would give us our individual assignments, tailored to our specific positions and capabilities. The assignments were always small, always plausible, always deniable. A letter delayed here, a rumor spread there, a piece of information shared with the right person at the right time. But the cumulative effects were extraordinary. In May 1785, I was instructed to ensure that a particular report on grain prices reached the king's desk at a specific moment, just after he had been informed of yet another failed attempt to reform the tax system. The report, which I had carefully edited to emphasize the worst projections, suggested that bread prices would rise dramatically in the coming months. The king, already frustrated by his inability to solve the financial crisis, made an impulsive decision to impose price controls on grain. The result was predictable to anyone who understood economics, which the Brotherhood certainly did. Farmers, unable to sell their grain at profitable prices, held back their harvests. Merchants hoarded supplies, waiting for the controls to be lifted. Within months, bread became scarce in Paris and other cities. The very policy intended to help the poor make their situation worse. And the Brotherhood ensured that everyone knew who to blame, not the economic system, not the failed policy, but the king and his ministers. Pamphlets appeared, printed on presses we controlled, explaining how the king's incompetence was starving the people. Rumors spread, through networks we had cultivated, about grain being hoarded in royal warehouses while children starved. The anger that had been diffuse and unfocused became concentrated and directed. We had turned a policy failure into a political crisis with nothing more than selective information and strategic timing. "You're learning," Madame Corday told me at our next meeting, held in the cellar of a bakery in Faubourg Saint-Antoine. "You're beginning to see how small actions create large consequences. How the right information at the right time can shape events more effectively than any army." "I'm also seeing how many people are suffering because of what we're doing," I said. She regarded me with something that might have been sympathy. "Yes, they are suffering. They were suffering before we intervened, and they would continue to suffer regardless of what we do. The question is not whether people will suffer. That is inevitable in a system as corrupt and inefficient as the French monarchy. The question is whether their suffering will serve a purpose, whether it will lead to meaningful change or simply perpetuate the same injustices under different names." "And you believe we're creating meaningful change?" "I believe we're creating the conditions for change. What emerges from those conditions will depend on many factors, some of which we can influence and some of which we cannot. But I know this: the old order is dying. It cannot be reformed. It can only be replaced, and replacement requires destruction. We are the architects of that destruction. Others will build what comes after." "What if what comes after is worse?" Madame Corday smiled. "Then we will destroy that too and try again. The Brotherhood has been doing this for centuries, Jean-Baptiste. We have seen empires rise and fall. We have watched as new orders become old orders, as revolutionaries become tyrants, as liberation becomes oppression. We do not expect perfection. We expect evolution, and evolution requires constant pressure, constant adaptation, constant willingness to tear down what no longer serves humanity's progress." It was a seductive philosophy. It was also terrifying, because it implied that there was no end point, no final victory, no moment when the Brotherhood could declare its work complete and step back. It was permanent revolution, permanent manipulation, permanent control, disguised as liberation. But I was not yet ready to see that clearly. I was still intoxicated by the sense of power, by the feeling that I mattered, that my actions were shaping history. The moral doubts I felt were easily suppressed by the excitement of being part of something larger than myself. In August 1786, I was given a more complex assignment. The Controller General, Charles Alexandre de Calonne, was preparing a comprehensive reform package that would have addressed many of France's financial problems. It included new taxes on the nobility, restructuring of the debt, and reforms to the tax collection system. If implemented, it might have stabilized the monarchy's finances and prevented the crisis that the Brotherhood was working to create. My task was to ensure that the reform package was leaked to the nobility before it was officially presented, giving them time to organize opposition. I was also to subtly alter some of the proposals to make them more extreme, more threatening to noble privileges, ensuring maximum resistance. It required careful work. I had to identify which documents would be most inflammatory, make copies without being detected, and arrange for them to reach specific nobles who would be most likely to mobilize opposition. I also had to make the alterations subtle enough that they would not be immediately detected, but significant enough to provoke outrage. I succeeded. The reforms were leaked. The nobility organized. And when Calonne finally presented his package to the Assembly of Notables in February 1787, he faced a wall of opposition. The reforms were rejected. Calonne was dismissed, and France lurched closer to the crisis that would eventually destroy the monarchy. I had helped sabotage the last real chance for peaceful reform, and I felt proud of it. That pride would haunt me for the rest of my life. By early 1788, the Brotherhood's strategy was becoming clear to me. We were not trying to create a specific outcome. We were trying to create chaos, to ensure that every attempt to solve France's problems failed, that every reform was blocked, that every crisis deepened. We were accelerating the collapse, pushing the system past the point where it could recover through gradual change. And it was working. The king was forced to recall the Estates General, the representative body that had not met since 1614. The nobility and clergy were in open conflict with the crown. The Third Estate, the commoners, were demanding real representation and real power. Bread prices were at crisis levels. Pamphlets calling for revolution were circulating openly. France was a powder keg, and we had spent years piling on the gunpowder. All we needed now was a spark. That spark would come on July 14, 1789, when the mob stormed the Bastille. But before that, there was one more lesson I needed to learn. One more operation that would show me exactly what the Brotherhood was capable of. In June 1789, as the Estates General transformed itself into the National Assembly and the king prepared to use force to dissolve it, the Brotherhood launched what Madame Corday called the provocation. The goal was to ensure that if the king did use force, the people would respond with overwhelming violence, making any peaceful resolution impossible. We spread rumors that the king was planning to massacre the assembly. We arranged for weapons to be stolen from armories and distributed to the working-class districts. We planted stories about foreign troops being brought in to crush the revolution. We created an atmosphere of paranoia and fear that made violence seem not just justified but necessary. I was part of this. I helped draft the pamphlets. I helped spread the rumors. I helped create the conditions that would lead to bloodshed. And when the violence came, when the Bastille fell and the governor's head was paraded through the streets on a pike, I told myself it was necessary. I told myself we were building something better. I told myself the lie that would sustain me for years to come, that the end justified the means. But standing in the streets of Paris on that July day, watching the celebration and the carnage, I felt something shift inside me. A small voice, easily ignored but persistent, asking a question I did not want to answer. What have we done? I would spend the next 5 years trying to silence that voice. And when I finally listened to it, it would be too late to undo the damage. The revolution had begun, and we had made it happen. September 1793. I was 35 years old, and I had become very good at my work. The naive clerk who had taken the oath 9 years earlier was gone, replaced by something harder, more calculating, more willing to do what was necessary. I had learned to sleep, despite the screams from the prisons. I had learned to eat while reading execution lists. I had learned to separate the work from the consequences, to see people as variables in equations rather than as human beings with lives and families and futures. The Brotherhood had taught me well. France was now in the grip of the terror. The king had been executed in January. The Queen would follow in October. The Committee of Public Safety, dominated by Robespierre and the radical Jacobins, had assumed dictatorial powers. The Revolutionary Tribunal sent dozens to the guillotine daily. The law of suspects made it a crime to be insufficiently enthusiastic about the revolution. Entire cities were being depopulated for the crime of resistance. And the Brotherhood was everywhere, pulling strings, amplifying paranoia, ensuring that the purges continued. I had been promoted within the revolutionary bureaucracy, now serving as a senior clerk in the Committee of General Security, the body responsible for internal security and the identification of counter-revolutionaries. My position gave me access to denunciation reports, arrest warrants, and interrogation transcripts. I knew who was being investigated, who was about to be arrested, who was marked for the guillotine, and I used that knowledge exactly as the Brotherhood instructed. My new handler was a woman named Héloïse, younger than Madame Corday but no less ruthless. She claimed to be a schoolteacher from Rouen, but her knowledge of revolutionary politics and her connections within the Jacobin Club suggested a far more sophisticated background. She had the unsettling habit of smiling while discussing mass executions, as if the death of thousands was merely an interesting intellectual problem. We met in a safe house in the Marais, a modest apartment that once belonged to an émigré noble and now served as one of the Brotherhood's many operational bases. The walls were lined with books, Rousseau, Voltaire, Montesquieu, the intellectual foundations of the revolution we had helped create, and were now helping to radicalize beyond recognition. The terror is working exactly as planned, Héloïse told me in October 1793, pouring wine as if we were discussing the weather. The old aristocracy is being eliminated. The moderate faction has been purged. The church is being systematically destroyed. France is being remade from the ground up. France is being drowned in blood, I said more sharply than I intended. Héloïse's smile did not waver. Yes, and from that blood will grow something new. You cannot make an omelet without breaking eggs, Jean-Baptiste. You know this. How many eggs? I asked. How many people have to die before we have enough broken shells for your omelet? As many as necessary, she said simply. The Brotherhood has been patient for centuries. We have waited through the rise and fall of empires, through wars and plagues and revolutions. We understand that true transformation requires sacrifice. The question is not whether people will die. People always die. The question is whether their deaths serve a purpose. I wanted to argue, to challenge her cold calculus, but I had learned that expressing doubt was dangerous. So instead, I asked about my next assignment. The committee is concerned about Danton, Héloïse said, her tone shifting to business. He's calling for moderation, for an end to the terror. He has support among the people and even within the convention. Robespierre sees him as a threat. Georges Danton was one of the revolution's founding figures, a powerful orator who had helped organize the storming of the Tuileries. He was also, by 1793 standards, a moderate, someone who believed the revolution had gone far enough, that it was time to consolidate power and end the mass executions. You want me to help destroy Danton? I asked. We want you to provide evidence, Héloïse corrected. Danton has been careless. He's accepted money from various sources, some of them questionable. He's lived well while others starved. These are facts. We simply want you to ensure that these facts come to the attention of the right people at the right time. And if Danton is executed, then France will have one less obstacle to true transformation. And the Brotherhood will have demonstrated once again that no one is beyond our reach. I did as I was told. I compiled a dossier on Danton's financial dealings, highlighting every questionable transaction, every luxury purchase, every moment of apparent hypocrisy. I made sure the dossier found its way to Saint-Just, Robespierre's most fanatical ally. Within months, Danton would be arrested, tried, and executed, his head falling into the basket alongside those of his supporters. I had helped kill one of the revolution's heroes with nothing more than paperwork. But Danton's execution marked a turning point, not just for France, but for the Brotherhood itself. Because in destroying Danton, we had eliminated the last significant voice for moderation. What remained was pure fanaticism, a revolution that had become a machine for producing corpses, and a government that existed solely to perpetuate its own terror. And even the Brotherhood was beginning to realize that we had created something we could no longer control. I first met Gregor face-to-face in November 1793 at a gathering of the Brotherhood's inner circle. There were perhaps 15 of us, the most senior members of the Paris operation, meeting in a warehouse near the docks. Gregor had risen rapidly within both the Brotherhood and the revolutionary government. He was now a member of the convention, a close ally of Robespierre, and one of the most powerful men in France. He was also, I realized within minutes of meeting him, completely insane. The revolution is entering its final phase, Gregor announced, pacing us like a general addressing troops. We have destroyed the monarchy. We have eliminated the aristocracy. We have subordinated the church. Now we must complete the work by eliminating the moderates, the compromisers, the weak-willed fools who think we can stop halfway. He turned to face us, his eyes burning with zealot's fire. Some of you have expressed concern about the terror. You worry that we are killing too many people, that we are alienating potential allies, that we are creating martyrs. These concerns are misguided. The terror is not a regrettable necessity. It is the revolution's highest expression. It is the mechanism by which we purge society of corruption and weakness. And it must continue until every last enemy of the Republic has been eliminated. Rousseau, sitting beside me, shifted uncomfortably. And who decides who is an enemy? He asked quietly. Gregor's smile was chilling. We do. The Brotherhood. We have always decided. That is our purpose, to identify threats to the new order and eliminate them before they can take root. And if that means executing thousands, tens of thousands, then so be it. History will vindicate us. History will call us butchers, Rousseau said. History is written by the victors, Gregor countered. And we will be the victors. Because we understand what others do not. That power comes not from popularity or legitimacy, but from the willingness to do what others will not. Terror is our weapon, and we will wield it until France is remade in our image. I felt sick. This was not the enlightened revolution we had been promised. This was tyranny wearing the mask of virtue, dictatorship dressed up as popular sovereignty. And the Brotherhood, which had once claimed to be building a republic of reason, had become the architects of a republic of fear. After the meeting, Rousseau pulled me aside again. Gregor is going to get us all killed, he said bluntly. He's lost sight of the original goal. We were supposed to guide the revolution, not become it. But he's convinced himself that he is the revolution, that his will and the people's will are one and the same. Can we stop him? I asked. Rousseau laughed bitterly. Stop him? Jean-Baptiste, he controls half the convention and has Robespierre's ear. He's more powerful than most ministers. And he's not alone. There are others in the Brotherhood who share his vision, who believe that permanent revolution is the only way to prevent backsliding into the old order. Then what do? We survive, Rousseau said. We keep our heads down, we execute our assignments, and we wait for the terror to burn itself out. Because it will burn out, Jean-Baptiste. It has to. No society can sustain this level of violence indefinitely. Eventually, people will tire of the bloodshed. Eventually, someone will stop Robespierre and Gregor and all the other fanatics. And when that happens, we need to be positioned to survive the backlash. And if we're not, Rousseau's expression was grim, then we'll end up in the tumbrel with everyone else. The terror reached its peak in the spring of 1794. The Law of 22 Prairie streamlined the Revolutionary Tribunal, eliminating most legal protections and allowing for mass executions based on the flimsiest evidence. The guillotine worked overtime, processing dozens of victims daily. The prisons were overflowing. Entire families were being arrested for the crimes of individual members. France had become a nation of informers and executioners, where a careless word could mean death. And the Brotherhood was feeding the machine. I spent my days reviewing denunciation reports, identifying potential counter-revolutionaries, and forwarding cases to the tribunal. I had become efficient at it, able to process dozens of files in a single afternoon, reducing human lives to check marks and signatures. I told myself I was just following orders, that I was not personally responsible for the executions. But I knew better. Every name I forwarded, every case I approved, was another person sent to die. I was a murderer. I have just industrialized the process. In June 1794, I was given an assignment that would change everything. Heloise summoned me to the safe house and handed me a file. "This is Madame Corday," she said. I stared at the name on the file, not comprehending it. Our Madame Corday? The one who recruited us, the same. She's been arrested on charges of counter-revolutionary activity. The evidence is substantial. I opened the file and felt the ground shift beneath me. The evidence was substantial because it was real. Madame Corday had been embezzling funds from the revolutionary government, using her position within the Brotherhood to enrich herself. She had also been in contact with émigré groups in London, apparently hedging her bet in case the revolution failed. She betrayed us, Heloise said flatly. She used the Brotherhood for personal gain and was preparing to flee if things went badly. Gregor wants her eliminated. Eliminated? She's already been arrested. She'll be tried and executed. Not good enough. Gregor wants to make an example. He wants her to confess to being part of a vast conspiracy against the revolution. He wants her to implicate others, moderates, people who have questioned terror, and he wants you to extract that confession. I felt cold. You want me to torture her? I want you to interrogate her, Heloise corrected. The methods are up to you. But Gregor needs that confession, and he needs it within the week. Can you do it? I should have refused. I should have walked away. Consequences be damned. But I was afraid. Afraid of Gregor, afraid of the terror, afraid of ending up in the same cell as Madame Corday. So I nodded. I'll do it. The prison was the conciergerie, the same place where the Queen had been held before her execution. Madame Corday was in a cell in the lower levels, damp and dark and reeking of human waste. When I entered, she looked up with eyes that held no surprise, only weary resignation. Jean-Baptiste, she said. I wondered if they would send you. I sat across from her, the confession document in my hands. You betrayed the Brotherhood. I survived, she corrected. There's a difference. The Brotherhood was supposed to be about building a better world. Instead, it became about perpetuating terror for its own sake. I saw which way the wind was blowing, and I made arrangements. You were in contact with émigrés. I was keeping options open. You should have done the same. She leaned forward, her voice dropping. Do you really think the terror will last forever? Do you think Robespierre and Gregor are invincible? They're not. They're riding a wave, and waves eventually crash. And when this one does, everyone associated with the terror will be destroyed, including you. Then why didn't you run? I asked. I waited too long, she admitted. I thought I had more time. I was wrong. She gestured to the confession. So now Gregor wants me to implicate others, to give him names he can use to expand the purges. And if I refuse, then I'm instructed to use whatever means necessary to extract the confession. Madame Corday laughed, a harsh sound in the damp cell. You won't do it. You're not like Gregor. You still have a conscience, buried though it may be. You're already questioning everything, aren't you? Already wondering if we made a terrible mistake? She was right, and we both knew it. I looked at the confession, at the blank spaces where names were supposed to go, and I decided. I'll tell Gregor you refused to cooperate, I said. That you died before I could extract the confession. They'll know you're lying. Probably. But by then, maybe it won't matter. Madame Corday studied me for a long moment. You're planning to run. I'm planning to survive. Then take my advice. Don't wait as long as I did. The terror is reaching its peak. Soon, very soon, it will turn on itself. And when it does, everyone with blood on their hands will be swept away. Get out while you still can. I left the prison without the confession. I reported to Heloise that Madame Corday had died during interrogation, her heart giving out before I could extract the information Gregor wanted. It was a transparent lie, but Heloise accepted it without comment. Perhaps she, too, was beginning to see the writing on the wall. Madame Corday was executed 3 days later, her head falling into the basket without ceremony or confession. And I began to plan my escape, because she had been right about everything. The terror was reaching its peak, and peaks are followed by falls. Robespierre was becoming increasingly paranoid, seeing conspiracies everywhere. The convention was tiring of the bloodshed. The people were exhausted, and the Brotherhood, which had thought it could control the revolution, was about to discover that revolutions eventually devour their creators. In July 1794, everything fell apart. Robespierre gave a speech to the convention, hinting at a new purge, suggesting that traitors existed even within the revolutionary government. But he refused to name names, creating a paranoia that turned everyone against him. The next day, the convention voted to arrest him. He and his allies, including Gregor, attempted to rally support, but were quickly overwhelmed. Within hours, they were in custody. I watched from the shadows as Gregor was dragged from the convention, his face a mask of disbelief. He had thought himself untouchable, a revolutionary hero who would reshape France in his image. Instead, he was just another victim of the machine he had helped build. The next day, Robespierre, Gregor, and 20 others were executed without trial. The terror was over, ended not by the people rising up, but by the revolutionaries turning on each other. The Brotherhood had lost. In the chaos that followed, the Thermidorian reaction, as it would be called, I destroyed most of my records and prepared to disappear. Rousseau found me one last time in the safe house that was no longer safe. "It's over," he said. "The Brotherhood in France is finished. Most of our members are dead or in hiding. The survivors are being hunted." "What about the larger organization?" I asked. "The network beyond France. Still intact, as far as I know. But the French operation is done. We overreached. We thought we could control the revolution, but we just accelerated it until it consumed us. What will you do?" "Disappear. Change my name, leave Paris, start over somewhere the terror never reached." "I suggest you do the same." "I will," I said. "But first, I'm going to document everything. Everything we did, everyone we killed, every manipulation and betrayal. Someone needs to know the truth." Rousseau looked at me with something like pity. "The truth? Jean-Baptiste, no one wants the truth. They want heroes and villains, simple narratives that make sense of chaos. If you tell them about the Brotherhood, about how the revolution was manipulated, they'll call you a liar or a madman. The truth is too complicated, too disturbing. It's easier to believe in spontaneous popular uprising than to accept that they were pawns in someone else's game." "Maybe," I said, "but I'm going to write it down anyway. If not for them, then for myself, so I can remember what we did and why we did it. So I can understand how we went from enlightened idealism to mass murder." Rousseau nodded slowly. "Then good luck. And Jean-Baptiste, if you do write it down, hide it well. Because if the Brotherhood ever discovers that you're documenting their secrets, they'll kill you. They may have lost in France, but they're still out there. And they don't forgive betrayal." He left, and I never saw him again. I spent the next month gathering my hidden records, compiling evidence, and preparing to flee Paris. The city was still dangerous, still full of score-settling and revenge killings, but the worst of the terror was over. The guillotine still operated, but now it was executing the executioners, the members of the Revolutionary Tribunal and the Committee of Public Safety who had sent so many to their deaths. Justice of a sort. I left Paris in September 1794, traveling under a false name, carrying nothing but a small bag and the hidden records that would eventually become this account. I headed south toward the countryside where the revolution had been less intense, where I might disappear among people who had never heard of Jean-Baptiste Mercier or the Brute Brotherhood. But even as I fled, I knew that the Brotherhood had not been destroyed. It had merely been defeated in one country, in one revolution. The network still existed, spread across Europe, embedded in governments and institutions, waiting for the next opportunity to shape history. And I knew that someday, someone would need to know the truth about what we had done, about how a handful of people, convinced of their own enlightenment, had helped plunge France into chaos and bloodshed, about how the revolution of reason had become the reign of terror. This is that truth. This is my testimony. This is my warning, because the Brotherhood is not gone. It has simply been learned to be more careful, more patient, more subtle. And if no one knows how to watch for it, if no one understands how it operates, then it will rise again. And next time it might succeed. The machinery of the terror was more complex than most people understood. It was not simply mob violence or revolutionary excess. It was a system, carefully designed and methodically implemented, with procedures and paperwork and bureaucratic processes that would have been familiar to any administrator. And the Brotherhood helped design that system. My position in the Committee of General Security gave me a unique perspective on how terror functioned. Every day, hundreds of denunciation reports arrived from across France. Citizens informing neighbors, servants betraying masters, children accusing parents. The reports were reviewed, categorized, and forwarded to investigators. Those that seemed credible led to arrests. Those arrested were interrogated, often tortured, and then sent to the Revolutionary Tribunal for trial. The trials were perfunctory. The tribunal had a conviction rate of over 90%. Most defendants were not allowed to be lawyers. Evidence was often nothing more than accusations and suspicions. Verdicts were predetermined. The guillotine waited, and I was part of the machinery that fed it. My specific role was to identify priority targets, people whose elimination would serve the Brotherhood's strategic goals. Sometimes these were genuine counter-revolutionaries, nobles or priests who were actively working against the revolution. But often they were moderates, people who supported the revolution but opposed its excesses, who wanted to stop the terror and establish a stable government. These moderates were, from the Brotherhood's perspective, more dangerous than outright royalists, because they offered an alternative, a path that might have led France away from the radicalism that served the Brotherhood's purposes. They had to be eliminated. In November 1793, I was given a list of 20 names. All were members of the convention, all were moderates who had spoken against the terror, and all needed to be removed. My task was to find or create evidence of counter-revolutionary activity that would justify their arrest. It was not difficult. In the paranoid atmosphere of 1793 Paris, almost anything could be construed as counter-revolutionary. A letter to a relative who had emigrated, a comment questioning the necessity of mass executions, attendance at a church service, failure to display sufficient enthusiasm for the revolution. The standards for treason had become so broad that everyone was guilty of something. I fabricated evidence for 12 of the 20. I found genuine but minor infractions for 6 more. Only 2 were clean enough that I could not build a case against them. Heloise was disappointed but accepted that 18 out of 20 was acceptable. All 18 were arrested within a month. 16 were executed. 2 died in prison before their trials. I had murdered 18 people with paperwork and lies, and I told myself it was necessary for the revolution. But the doubts were growing harder to suppress, especially after I met Marianne. She was not part of the Brotherhood. She was a clerk in the Ministry of the Interior, a widow whose husband had died in the early days of the revolution. We met by chance in a cafe near the Palais Royal, both of us seeking a moment of normalcy in a city consumed by paranoia and violence. We began meeting regularly, carefully, always in public places where our conversations could seem casual and innocent. Marianne was everything the revolution claimed to value: intelligent, principled, and committed to reason and justice. She believed in the revolution's ideals, even as she was horrified by its methods. And she made me see, with painful clarity, the gap between what the Brotherhood claimed to be building and what we were creating. "They're killing people for owning books," she told me one afternoon in December 1793, her voice low and urgent. "I processed an arrest warrant yesterday for a man whose only crime was possessing a collection of royalist poetry. Not writing it, not distributing it, just owning it. He's 60 years old. He's never been involved in politics. And he's going to die because someone denounced him, and the tribunal needs to meet its quota." "The revolution has enemies," I said, the words automatic, rehearsed. "The revolution is creating enemies," Marianne countered. "Every execution creates a dozen more people who hate us, who will work against us, who will celebrate when this madness finally ends. We're not building a republic. We're building a graveyard," I wanted to argue. I wanted to defend what we were doing, but I could not, because she was right. That conversation haunted me. It made me see the terror not as a necessary phase of revolutionary transformation, but as a self-perpetuating machine that existed primarily to justify its own existence. The more people we killed, the more enemies we created. The more enemies we created, the more killing we had to do. It was a cycle that could only end in either total victory, the elimination of everyone who opposed us, or total collapse. And the Brotherhood was feeding the cycle, ensuring that it continued, that it accelerated, that it consumed everyone it touched. In January 1794, I was summoned to a meeting with Gregor. It was the first time I had met with him privately, and I was immediately struck by how different he was from Madame Corday or even Heloise. Where they had been calculating and pragmatic, Gregor was fervent, almost messianic. He spoke of terror not as a tool, but as a purifying force, a necessary cleansing that would create a new humanity. "You've been doing excellent work," he told me, pacing his office in the convention building. "Your target identifications have been precise, your evidence compelling. You understand what needs to be done." "I do my duty," I said carefully. "Duty," Gregor smiled. "Such a bourgeois concept. The revolution requires more than duty, Jean-Baptiste. It requires passion, commitment, the willingness to do whatever is necessary, no matter how difficult, no matter how many must die. How many will that be? I asked. As many as it takes. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, if necessary. The old world must be destroyed before the new can be built. Every aristocrat, every priest, every moderate, every person who cannot fully commit to the revolution, they must all be eliminated. Only then can we create a truly rational society. I felt cold. This was not revolution. This was genocide, dressed up in the language of enlightenment. And what happens when there's no one left to eliminate? I asked. Gregor's smile widened. Then we will have achieved perfection. A society of equals, governed by reason, free from the corruption of the past. That is the Brotherhood's vision. That is what we are building. I left that meeting knowing that I could not continue. The Brotherhood had become exactly what it claimed to oppose, a tyranny, absolute and unaccountable, convinced of its own righteousness and willing to commit any atrocity in pursuit of its goals. But I also knew that living would be dangerous. The Brotherhood did not tolerate defection. Those who tried to leave ended up in prison or on the scaffold. I would have to be careful, patient, and above all, I would have to continue appearing loyal while I planned my escape. The opportunity came in March 1794, with Madame Corday's arrest. Her betrayal of the Brotherhood gave me cover. I could express outrage, demonstrate my loyalty by volunteering to interrogate her, and use the chaos of her exposure to begin distancing myself from the organization. But I also saw in her fate a warning. She had tried to hedge her bets, to prepare an escape route, and she had been caught. If I was going to leave, I could not make the same mistakes. I could not trust anyone. I could not leave traces, and I could not wait too long. The fall of Robespierre in July 1794 gave me the opening I needed. In the chaos that followed, the Thermidorian reaction, the dismantling of the terror's apparatus, the settling of scores, I destroyed my records, severed my connections to the Brotherhood, and disappeared into the mass of refugees and survivors trying to rebuild their lives. But I also knew that the Brotherhood would not forget. That somewhere, someone was keeping track of former members, noting who had remained loyal and who had fled. And that eventually, they would come for me. I bought myself time, but time was all I had bought. The question was whether it would be enough to atone for what I had done, whether documenting the Brotherhood's crimes could somehow balance the scales against my own guilt, whether bearing witness could be a form of redemption. I did not know, but it was all I had. I thought I had escaped. I was wrong. The village of Saint-Étienne-du-Rouvroy, 20 kilometers south of Rouen, was exactly the kind of place where a man could disappear. Small enough that strangers were noticed, but large enough that one more refugee from Paris would not attract undue attention. I took a room above a baker's shop, paid 6 months in advance with money I had carefully saved, and introduced myself as Pierre Dubois, a clerk whose employer had been guillotined during the Terror. It was a common enough story. Half of France was trying to forget what they had done or seen during those years. No one asked too many questions. I found work keeping accounts for a local merchant, a man who traded in grain and textiles, and needed someone literate to manage his correspondence. The work was tedious but safe, and safety was all I wanted. I kept my head down, attended Mass when expected, and avoided political discussions. I was, to all appearances, exactly what I claimed to be. A minor functionary trying to rebuild his life after the revolution had destroyed everything he knew. For 3 months, I almost believed it myself. The letter arrived in December 1794, slipped under my door in the middle of the night. No seal, no signature, just the symbol I had hoped never to see again. The broken crown wrapped in chains, drawn in ink the color of dried blood. Inside a single line, "We know where you are." My hands shook as I burned the letter in the fireplace. They had found me. Despite my precautions, despite the false name and the careful distance from Paris, the Brotherhood had found me. And if they had found me, they could reach me. I considered running again, but where would I go? If they had tracked me to an obscure village in Normandy, they could track me anywhere in France. And fleeing would only confirm that I had something to hide, that I was worth pursuing. So instead, I waited. The second letter came a week later, this time with more detail. "You took something that belongs to us. Return it, and you will be left in peace. Refuse, and you will be hunted. They wanted the records, the documentation I had compiled over years, the evidence of every operation, every manipulation, every crime the Brotherhood had committed in France. The testimony I had planned to hide until the time was right to reveal it. I had been naive to think they would simply let me walk away with that knowledge. I wrote a response, careful and measured, and left it in the same place I had found the letters, tucked behind a loose brick in the wall of the church cemetery. The records are hidden. If anything happens to me, they will be delivered to the authorities. Leave me alone and they stay hidden. It was a bluff. I had no mechanism for posthumous delivery, no ally I trusted enough to carry out such a plan. But I hoped the threat would be enough to buy me time. It bought me 2 weeks. I was walking back from the market when I noticed him. A man in his 30s, well-dressed for the provinces, watching me from across the square. When I changed direction, he followed. When I entered the shop, he waited outside. When I finally confronted him, he smiled. "Jean-Baptiste Mercier," he said, "or should I call you Pierre Dubois? Who are you? A friend? Or an enemy? That depends entirely on you." He gestured to a nearby tavern. "Let's talk somewhere more private." I should have run. I should have screamed for help. But curiosity and fear in equal measure drove me to follow him into the tavern, to a corner table where we would not be overheard. "My name is Laurent," he said, ordering wine for both of us. "I'm here on behalf of the Brotherhood. Specifically, on behalf of those members who believe you've made a grave mistake. I've left the Brotherhood. I want nothing more to do with it." "Leaving is not an option," Laurent said calmly. "You took an oath. You swore loyalty. That oath does not expire simply because you've grown a conscience. The Brotherhood I swore loyalty to no longer exists. It died with Gregor and Robespierre. The Brotherhood is larger than France, larger than any single revolution. You know this. What happened in Paris was setbacks, yes, but the network endures. And that network cannot tolerate members who betray their oaths and steal sensitive information. I haven't betrayed anyone. I've simply documented the truth." Laurent's smile faded. "The truth, as you call it, is dangerous. If those records were to become public, they would expose operations across Europe. They would reveal identities, methods, connections. They would destroy decades of careful work. And they would make martyrs of people like Gregor, turning them into symbols of revolutionary excess rather than what they truly were, tools of a larger design." "Tools that went mad," I said. "Tools that killed thousands. Tools that accomplished their purpose," Laurent corrected. "The French monarchy is destroyed. The old aristocracy is broken. The church has been subordinated. France will never return to what it was. That was the goal, and it was achieved. The cost was high, yes, but costs always are. And now you want me to hand over the records and pretend none of it happened. I want you to remember who you are and what you owe. The Brotherhood protected you, trained you, gave you purpose, and in return you owe it loyalty. Return the records and this conversation ends. Refuse and he let the threat hang in the air. And what? You'll kill me? Then the records become public. Will they? Laurent leaned forward. You're bluffing, Jean-Baptiste. You have no mechanism for posthumous release. You're alone, isolated with no allies and no leverage. If you die, the records die with you, buried wherever you've hidden them. And the Brotherhood has all the time in the world to find them. He was right, and we both knew it. But I was not ready to surrender the only weapon I had. I need time to think, I said. You have 3 days, Laurent replied. After that, we stop asking nicely. He left, and I sat alone in the tavern, trying to decide what to do. I could run, but they would find me again. I could surrender the records, but then I would have nothing to protect me. Or I could find allies, people who had also been burned by the Brotherhood, who might help me survive. The problem was finding them without exposing myself further. The answer came from an unexpected source. 2 days after my meeting with Laurent, I received another letter, this one in different handwriting. If you want to survive, meet me at the mill outside town at midnight. Come alone. A friend. It was almost certainly a trap, but I was running out of options. The mill was abandoned, its wheel frozen by winter ice. I arrived early, looking from the shadows to see if anyone else was there. At midnight, a figure emerged from the darkness, a woman, perhaps 40, wrapped in a heavy cloak against the cold. Jean-Baptiste Mercier? She asked quietly. Who are you? My name is Marguerite. I was a member of the Brotherhood in Lyon. I left after the terror, just like you. And just like you, I've been hunted. How did you find me? The same way they did, through the network. But unlike them, I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to offer you a choice. She moved closer, her breath misting in the cold air. There are others like us, former members who left when the Brotherhood became too extreme, who saw what it was becoming and wanted no part of it. We've been finding each other, slowly, carefully. We call ourselves unbowed. The unbowed? Those who refuse to bend to the Brotherhood's will, those who choose conscience over obedience. There are perhaps 20 of us scattered across France, maybe more in other countries. We're not an organization. We learned that lesson. But we share information, we protect each other, and we document everything the Brotherhood does. Why? Because someone needs to bear witness. Someone needs to remember what happened and why, so it doesn't happen again. The Brotherhood thinks it can operate in secret forever, that it can manipulate history without consequence. We're going to prove them wrong. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that I was not alone, that there were others who had seen the same horrors and reached the same conclusions. But I had learned to be suspicious. How do I know you're not working for them? I asked. Marguerite pulled back her cloak, revealing a scar across her throat. They tried to kill me in Lyon. I survived barely. I've been hiding for 6 months, moving from place to place, always one step ahead. If I were working for them, I'd be in Paris, not freezing in a mill in Normandy. What do you want from me? Your records. Not to destroy them, but to add them to our archive. We're building a complete account of the Brotherhood's operations, everything from its origins to the present day. When the time is right, when it's safe, we'll make it public. But until then, we need to keep it hidden and keep each other alive. And if I refuse, then you're on your own. Laurent and his people will keep coming. Eventually, they'll get what they want, either by force or by finding your hiding place. With us, you have a chance. A small one, but better than nothing. I made my decision. The records are in Paris, hidden in a place only I know. If I'm going to give them to you, I'll need help getting them out, Marguerite nodded. We can arrange that. But first, you need to disappear. Laurent knows where you are. By tomorrow, there will be more of them. We need to move you somewhere safer. Where? Belgium. The Brotherhood's network there was damaged during the Austrian occupation. It's not safe, but it's safer than France. We have contacts in Brussels who can hide you while we retrieve your records. And then we keep moving, keep documenting, keep surviving, until the Brotherhood makes a mistake big enough that we can expose them without being killed for it. It was not much of a plan. But it was better than waiting for Laurent to make good on his threats. We left that night, traveling on foot through the frozen countryside, avoiding main roads and towns where we might be recognized. Marguerite had arranged for horses to be waiting at a farm 20 kilometers away, and from there, we rode north toward the Belgian border. It took us 4 days, moving mostly at night, sleeping in barns and abandoned buildings. Marguerite proved to be resourceful and cautious, with a network of contacts, former Brotherhood members and sympathizers who provided food, shelter, and information about patrols and checkpoints. We crossed into Belgium near Tournai, slipping across the border in the early morning fog. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders as we left France behind. For the first time in months, I could breathe. But the relief was short-lived. We had been in Brussels for less than a week when Marguerite received word that Laurent had followed us. He had tracked us to the border and was now in Belgium, along with at least 3 other Brotherhood operatives. They were hunting us systematically, checking every safe house, every contact, every place we might hide. They're not going to stop, Marguerite said, her face grim. Not until they have the records or we're dead. Then we get the records and disappear, I said. Somewhere they can't follow. There's nowhere they can't follow. The Brotherhood has networks everywhere. England, Germany, Italy, even America. As long as we're alive and those records exist, we're targets. Then what do? We fight back, Marguerite said. We've been running, hiding, trying to survive. But survival isn't enough. We need to hurt them, to make them understand that hunting us has a cost. How? By exposing them. Not the full archive, That would get us killed immediately. But pieces, carefully chosen pieces that reveal their methods without revealing our sources. We leak information to newspapers, to government officials, to anyone who might act on it. We make them paranoid, make them question their own security. We turn their tactics against them. It was dangerous. It was probably suicidal, but it was also the only option that offered more than endless flights. "I'm in," I said. Over the next 3 months, the Unbowed launched a campaign of exposure. We leaked documents revealing Brotherhood involvement in the terror. We provided evidence of financial corruption to Belgian authorities. We sent anonymous letters to newspapers detailing how the revolution had been manipulated. We were careful, never revealing enough to expose ourselves, always leaving trails that led to dead ends or false identities. And it worked. The Brotherhood became paranoid, launching internal investigations, purging members suspected of disloyalty. Laurent was recalled to Paris. Other operatives were reassigned. The pressure on us eased, not because they had stopped hunting us, but because they were too busy hunting each other. But the victory was temporary. In April 1795, Marguerite was betrayed by someone we had trusted, a former member who had been influenced by the Brotherhood's promises or threats. She was captured in Antwerp, interrogated, and killed. Her body was found in the canal 3 days later. I learned of her death from another member of the Unbowed, a man named Thomas, who had been working with her in Belgium. He found me in the boarding house where I was hiding and delivered the news with quiet fury. "They tortured her," he said, "for days, trying to get her to reveal the location of the archive and the identities of other members. She told them nothing. How do you know? Because we're all still alive. If she had talked, we'd all be dead by now." I felt a grief so profound it was almost physical. Marguerite had saved my life, had given me purpose when I had none, had shown me that resistance was possible. And now she was gone, another victim of the organization we had both tried to escape. "What do we do now?" I asked. "We keep going," Thomas said. "That's what she would have wanted. We keep documenting, keep exposing, keep fighting. Because if we stop, if we give up, then she died for nothing. And if we keep going, we'll end up like her." "Probably," Thomas admitted, "but at least we'll die knowing we tried." That we didn't just accept what the Brotherhood wanted us to accept, that we chose to resist. It was not much comfort, but it was enough. I spent the next year moving across Europe, never staying in one place for more than a few weeks, always one step ahead of the Brotherhood's hunters. I met other members of the Unbowed, added their testimonies to the growing archive, and continued the work Marguerite had started. But I also began to understand something that Marguerite had perhaps known but never said. We could not win. The Brotherhood was too large, too well connected, too patient. For every operative we exposed, 2 more remained hidden. For every document we leaked, a dozen more stayed secret. We were gnats biting at an elephant, annoying but ultimately insignificant. The best we could hope for was survival, and even that was uncertain. In the summer of 1796, I finally made it back to Paris to retrieve the records I had hidden. The city had changed, the terror's wounds still visible but beginning to heal. The Directory had replaced the convention, bringing a kind of exhausted stability. People were trying to forget the revolution, to move on, to rebuild their lives. I retrieved the records from their hiding place, a false wall in a building that had once housed the Committee of General Security, and added them to the archive Thomas was maintaining in Germany. And then I disappeared again, this time heading east, toward the German states where the Brotherhood's network was weaker. I was tired of running, tired of fighting, tired of looking over my shoulder, but I could not stop, because Marguerite had been right. Someone needed to bear witness. Someone needed to remember. And if that someone had to be me, then so be it. The Brotherhood had taught me many things. It had taught me how to manipulate, how to deceive, how to kill without leaving evidence. But it had also taught me, inadvertently, how to resist, how to survive when survival seemed impossible, how to hold on to conscience when conscience was a liability. I would use those lessons. I would survive. And someday, when it was safe, the truth would come out. All of it. The journey from Saint-Étienne-du-Rouvray to Brussels was 200 kilometers of constant fear. Marguerite had arranged for us to travel as brother and sister, refugees from the terror-seeking family in the Austrian Netherlands. We had forged papers, carefully constructed backstories, and enough money to bribe our way past checkpoints. But we also had the Brotherhood hunting us, and they had resources we could only guess at. The first close call came at Rouen. We were waiting for horses at the farm. Marguerite had mentioned when a man approached us, seemingly a local farmer offering to sell us provisions. But I recognized the symbol tattooed on his wrist, visible for just a moment when he reached for his purse, the broken crown wrapped in chains. He was Brotherhood. I caught Marguerite's eye and saw that she had noticed too. We made our excuses, left the farm, and spent the next 6 hours hiding in a forest, watching to see if we were being followed. When we finally emerged, we took a different route, avoiding the main roads entirely. "They're everywhere," Marguerite said as we trudged through muddy fields in the darkness. "Every town, every village, every crossroads. The network is more extensive than we thought." How did they find us so quickly? They didn't find us. They're watching everyone. Every refugee, every traveler, every person who doesn't fit the normal pattern. They cast a wide net and wait to see what they catch. It was a sobering realization. We were not being specifically hunted. We were being caught in a surveillance system that monitored everyone. The Brotherhood had learned from the terror, had adapted its methods, had created a network of watchers and informants that operated independently of any government. We made it to the Belgian border, but the crossing was more difficult than Marguerite had anticipated. The Austrian authorities were cracking down on French refugees, fearing revolutionary agitators. We spent 2 days hiding in a barn, waiting for the right moment, the right guard, the right combination of bribery and luck. When we finally crossed, exhausted and filthy, I felt a relief so profound it was almost painful. We had escaped France. We were safe, or so I thought. Brussels in late 1794 was a city of exiles and conspiracies. French émigrés plotted restoration. Revolutionary sympathizers planned uprisings. Austrian officials tried to maintain order while preparing for the inevitable French invasion. And somewhere in that chaos, the Brotherhood operated, watching, manipulating, pursuing its own inscrutable goals. Marguerite took me to a safe house in the Margolles district, a working-class neighborhood where strangers attracted less attention. The house belonged to a Belgian merchant who had been burned by the Brotherhood years earlier and now quietly supported the unbowed. He provided us with a room, asked no questions, and made it clear that we could stay as long as we needed. It was there that I met the others. Thomas arrived first, a German academic who had been recruited by the Brotherhood in Vienna and had fled after witnessing its role in suppressing the Jacobin conspiracy. He was methodical, precise, obsessed with documentation. He had been collecting evidence of Brotherhood operations for 3 years, compiling an archive that he hoped would someday expose the organization. Then came Sophie, a French actress who had been used by the Brotherhood to seduce and compromise political figures. She had escaped after one of her targets committed suicide, unable to live with the blackmail the Brotherhood had used to control him. She was bitter, angry, and absolutely committed to destroying the organization that had used her. Finally, there was Anton, a former Brotherhood enforcer who had defected after being ordered to kill a family, including children, whose father had tried to leave the organization. He was quiet, haunted, and the most dangerous person I had ever met. He knew the Brotherhood's methods because he had used them, and he knew how to fight them. Together, we were the core of the unbowed in Belgium. 5 people with different skills, different backgrounds, different reasons for resistance, but united by the knowledge of what the Brotherhood was and what it was capable of. "We can't just hide," Thomas said at our first real meeting held in the merchant's cellar. "Hiding is temporary. Eventually they'll find us, or we'll make a mistake, or circumstances will change. We need to be proactive." "Proactive how?" I asked. "By doing what they do, gathering information, identifying their operations, disrupting them when we can, and documenting everything so that even if we fail, the evidence survives." "That's suicide," Sophie said. "The moment we start actively interfering, they'll prioritize finding us. We'll go from being fugitives to being targets." "We're already targets," Anton said quietly. "The only question is whether we die hiding or die fighting. It was Marguerite who broke the impasse. We do both. We hide, but we also fight. We're careful, we're patient, and we only take actions that have strategic value. We're not trying to destroy the Brotherhood. That's impossible. We're trying to limit its effectiveness, to make its operations more difficult, to create uncertainty and paranoia within its ranks. And to bear witness, I added, to ensure that someone knows what they're doing even if we can't stop them. That became our mission. Over the next months, we developed a system. Thomas maintained the archive, carefully cataloging every piece of evidence we collected. Sophie used her contacts in the émigré community to gather intelligence about Brotherhood activities. Anton provided security and, when necessary, direct action. Marguerite coordinated our operations and maintained contact with other unbowed cells across Europe. And I did what I had always done. I worked with documents, information, bureaucracy. I forged papers, altered records, created false trails that led the Brotherhood's hunters away from us and toward dead ends. Our first major operation came in February 1795. We learned that the Brotherhood was planning to assassinate an Austrian official who was investigating financial irregularities in the occupation administration. The assassination would be blamed on French revolutionaries, creating a pretext for harsher measures against refugees and potentially triggering a diplomatic crisis. We could not prevent the assassination directly. We did not know who the assassin was or when the attack would occur. But we could warn the target and provide evidence of the Brotherhood's involvement, turning what was supposed to be a clean operation into a messy exposure. Anton delivered the warning. I prepared the documentation, and Sophie ensured that the right people in the Austrian administration knew where to look for evidence. The assassination attempt failed. The would-be assassin was captured, and while the Brotherhood managed to prevent a full exposure, the assassin died in custody before he could be interrogated. The operation was compromised enough that it had to be abandoned. It was a small victory, but it proved that resistance was possible. Of course, it also made us a priority target. Laurent's arrival in Brussels was inevitable. What surprised me was how long it took. Nearly 6 months. When he finally appeared, it was not with threats or violence, but with the same calm reasonableness he had shown in Calais. We met in a public square, surrounded by people, where neither of us could make a scene. He sat on a bench, feeding pigeons, looking like any other prosperous merchant enjoying a spring afternoon. "You've been busy," he said when I sat down beside him. The failed assassination, the leaked documents in Vienna, the exposure of our operation in Amsterdam. All very clever, all very futile. "We're not trying to destroy you," I said. "We're just trying to survive. By interfering with our operations, by exposing our methods. That's not survival, Jean-Baptiste. That's war." "Then it's a war you started," Laurent sighed. "We gave you a chance to rejoin. We offered you power, protection, a role in shaping the future. You refused. Fine. But you could have simply disappeared, lived quietly, caused no trouble. Instead, you've chosen to actively oppose us. That cannot be tolerated. So you're here to kill me? I'm here to give you one last chance. Stop. Disband the unbowed. Destroy the archive. Disappear completely. Do that, and we'll leave you alone. And if I refuse, then we'll kill you. And everyone you've worked with, and everyone they've worked with, we'll dismantle the unbowed piece by piece until there's nothing left. You know we can do it. You know we will do it. The only question is how many people have to die before you accept the inevitable." I looked at him, this man who spoke of mass murder with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather, and I understood something fundamental about the Brotherhood. It was not evil in the sense of enjoying cruelty. It was evil in the sense of being completely indifferent to human suffering. People were variables in equations, obstacles to be removed, tools to be used. The Brotherhood's vision of enlightened rule had no room for compassion, for mercy, for the recognition that every person they killed was a universe of experiences and relationships and possibilities. "No," I said, "we won't stop." Laurent nodded as if he had expected that answer. "Then we're done talking. The next time we meet, one of us will die." He stood, tipped his hat, and walked away. And I sat there, watching the pigeons, knowing that I had just signed my own death warrant and the death warrants of everyone I worked with. But I also knew that we had no choice, Because the alternative, allowing the Brotherhood to operate unchallenged, to manipulate and control and kill without consequence, was worse than death. Marguerite was killed 3 months later. The betrayal came from someone we had trusted, a former member who had been turned by the Brotherhood's combination of threats and promises. She was captured, tortured for information about the archive and other members, and killed when she refused to cooperate. Her death broke something in me. Not my resolve, that only hardened, but my illusions. I had thought that resistance could be noble, that it could lead to victory, that bearing witness could somehow redeem the crimes I had committed. But Marguerite's death taught me that resistance was just another form of suffering, that victory was impossible, and that redemption was a fantasy. All we could do was survive and document and hope that someday someone would care about the truth we had died to preserve. The years between 1796 and 1804 taught me that the Brotherhood was not one organization but many, a hydra that grew new heads every time one was severed. The French operation had been destroyed, yes, but that destruction had merely forced the Brotherhood to adapt, to evolve, to become something more dangerous, precisely because it had learned from its failures. I was living in Hamburg when I first understood the scope of what we were facing. The city was a crossroads of European commerce, a place where information flowed as freely as goods. Thomas had established the unbowed primary archive there, hidden in the basement of a shipping company owned by a sympathetic merchant. I helped him organize the documents we had collected, testimonies from former members, financial records, correspondence that revealed the Brotherhood's operations across Europe. That was when we discovered the letters. They were hidden in a batch of documents Thomas had acquired from a former Brotherhood operative in Vienna, a man who had died under mysterious circumstances. The letters were coded, but Thomas had become skilled at breaking the Brotherhood's ciphers. What they revealed changed everything. The Brotherhood had not been destroyed by the Terror's collapse. It had been reformed, restructured from the ground up by a council of senior members who had survived precisely because they had never been directly involved in the French operation. These men, and they were all men, as far as we could tell, had watched the French disaster unfold and drawn lessons from it. Lesson 1. Never concentrate power in a single country or operation. The French cell had become too large, too visible, too invested in a single revolutionary project. When that project collapsed, it took the entire cell with it. The new Brotherhood would be more distributed, with autonomous cells operating independently, connected only through the council. Lesson 2. Never let ideology override pragmatism. Gregor and his faction had become true believers, convinced that permanent revolution was possible and desirable. They had forgotten that the Brotherhood's purpose was not to create utopia, but to accumulate power. The new Brotherhood would be ideologically flexible, supporting whatever movements and governments served its interests. Lesson 3. Never leave evidence. The French operation had been careless, maintaining records, using real names, meeting in person. The new Brotherhood would operate with absolute compartmentalization, using codes, dead drops, and intermediaries. No member would know more than necessary. No operation would leave traces. They've learned from their mistakes, Thomas said, his face pale as he read through the decoded letters. They're not going to make the same errors again. Which means we can't fight them the same way, I said. Exposure won't work if there's nothing to expose. Infiltration won't work if no one knows who the members are. So what do we do? I had been thinking about this question for years, ever since Marguerite's death. The unbowed had been reactive, responding to Brotherhood operations, documenting their crimes, trying to expose them. But we had never been proactive. We had never tried to anticipate their moves, to counter their strategies before they were implemented. We need to think like them, I said. We need to understand their goals, their methods, their vulnerabilities. And then we need to exploit those vulnerabilities before they can adapt. You're talking about becoming them, Thomas said quietly. No, I'm talking about using their own tactics against them. They manipulate events from the shadows. We do the same. They plant information and spread rumors. We counter with our own. They recruit the ambitious and the disaffected. We recruit people who have been burned by them. That's dangerous. If we start operating like the Brotherhood, we risk becoming what we're fighting against. He was right, of course. But I had long since accepted that there were no clean hands in this war. The question was not whether we would compromise our principles, but how much we would compromise them and for what purpose. Then we set limits, I said. We don't kill. We don't manipulate innocent people. We don't create chaos for its own sake. But we do fight back actively, strategically, because if we don't, they'll eventually find us all and kill us. And then there will be no one left to bear witness. Thomas considered this for a long moment. All right, he said finally, but we need more people. The Unbowed is too small, too scattered. If we're going to actively counter the Brotherhood, we need a real organization. Over the next 2 years, we built one. We recruited carefully, targeting former Brotherhood members who had left in disgust, government officials who had been manipulated and wanted revenge, journalists who had uncovered pieces of the conspiracy and wanted to know more. We established safe houses across Europe, created our own network of couriers and informants, developed our own codes and security protocols. We called ourselves the Lumière, the light, because we were dedicated to exposing what the Brotherhood wanted to keep hidden. It was perhaps pretentious, but it gave us an identity, a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. By 1800, the Lumière had perhaps 50 active members and twice that many informants and sympathizers. We were still vastly outnumbered by the Brotherhood, but we were organized, motivated, and increasingly effective. We disrupted Brotherhood operations in Italy, leaking information about their involvement in the political chaos following the French invasion. We exposed their financial manipulations in the German states, leading to the arrest of several key operatives. We even managed to prevent an assassination in London, warning the target reformist member of Parliament that he was being targeted. We were winning small victories, but we were also making powerful enemies. The Brotherhood's response was swift and brutal. In the spring of 1801, 3 Lumière safe houses were raided simultaneously in Vienna, Prague, and Amsterdam. 12 of our members were killed, and our archives in those cities were seized or destroyed. The message was clear. The Brotherhood knew about us, knew what we were doing, and would not tolerate our interference. Thomas was killed in the Vienna raid. I learned of his death from a survivor who had escaped and made his way to Hamburg. Thomas had been captured alive and interrogated for hours before being killed. The survivor did not know what information, if any, Thomas had revealed before he died. I had lost another friend, another ally, another person who had believed that resistance was possible. And I was beginning to wonder if we were deluding ourselves, if the Brotherhood was simply too large, too entrenched, too ruthless to be defeated. But I could not stop. Not now. Not after everything we had sacrificed. I took over leadership of the Lumière, such as it was. We had been decentralized by design, but someone needed to coordinate operations, to make strategic decisions, to keep the organization from fracturing under pressure. I was not a natural leader. I was a clerk, a bureaucrat, someone who worked best with documents and details. But I was also one of the few senior members still alive, and someone had to do it. The next 3 years were a blur of operations, narrow escapes, and Pyrrhic victories. We disrupted Brotherhood activities across Europe, but at tremendous cost. For every operation we stopped, we lost members. For every document we leaked, the Brotherhood adapted its security. We were locked in a war of attrition, and we were losing. The turning point came in 1804 with the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon was not a Brotherhood creation. He was too independent, too ambitious, too unpredictable to be anyone's puppet. But the Brotherhood had certainly helped his rise, seeing in him an opportunity to reshape Europe according to their vision. They had supported his coup in 1799, facilitated his consolidation of power, and now they were positioning themselves to benefit from his conquests. But Napoleon was also a threat to the Brotherhood. Because unlike the revolutionary governments that had preceded him, Napoleon was not interested in ideology or Enlightenment principles. He was interested in power, pure and simple, and he was smart enough to recognize that secret societies and shadow networks were threats to his absolute control. I saw an opportunity. Through intermediaries, I arranged for information about the Brotherhood to reach Napoleon's intelligence service. Not everything. I was not suicidal. but enough to make him aware that there was an organization operating within his empire, manipulating events, pursuing its own agenda. I framed it as a threat to his rule, which it was. Napoleon's response exceeded my expectations. He launched a systematic investigation, arresting suspected Brotherhood members, seizing documents, and dismantling networks. The Brotherhood, which had thought itself secure under Napoleon's rule, found itself under attack from the very regime it had helped create. It was beautiful in a way. The Brotherhood had spent decades manipulating governments and revolutions, and now one of its own creations had turned on it. But it also made me a target, because the Brotherhood knew or suspected that someone had betrayed them to Napoleon, and they were determined to find out who. I was in Paris when they came for me. I had been meeting with a Lumiere contact, a clerk in Napoleon's Ministry of Police, when I noticed the surveillance. Two men watching from across the street, a woman following me through the market, a carriage that seemed to be everywhere I went. I had been careless, staying too long in one place, becoming too confident in my security measures, and now I was going to pay for that mistake. I managed to evade immediate capture, slipping through the narrow streets of the Marais, using routes I had memorized years ago during my time in the revolutionary bureaucracy. But I knew I could not stay in Paris. The Brotherhood had too many resources, too many eyes. I needed to get out of France entirely. I made it as far as Calais before they caught up with me. I was in a dockside tavern, arranging passage to England, when a man sat down across from me. He was perhaps 50, well-dressed, with the calm confidence of someone who held all the cards. "Jean-Baptiste Mercier," he said. "Or should I call you Pierre Dubois? Or perhaps one of the dozen other names you've used over the years. Who are you?" "My name is Armand. I'm a member of the Brotherhood's council, and I'm here to make you an offer." "I'm not interested. You haven't heard it yet." Armand ordered wine, settling in as if we were old friends catching up. "You've been a thorn in our side for years now, you and your Lumiere. You've disrupted operations, exposed members, cost us time and resources. You've been remarkably effective for such a small organization. If you're here to kill me, get on with it. I'm not here to kill you. I'm here to recruit you." I stared at him, not comprehending. "You want me to rejoin the Brotherhood? Not the old Brotherhood, the new one, the one that has learned from its mistakes, that understands the need for flexibility and pragmatism. You've proven yourself to be intelligent, resourceful, and capable of operating under extreme pressure. Those are exactly the qualities we need. I've spent years fighting you, and we've spent years fighting you. But fighting is expensive and ultimately pointless. We're offering you a chance to end this war. Rejoin the Brotherhood, bring the Lumiere with you, and we'll integrate your organization into ours. You'll have a seat on the council, real power, the ability to shape our operations, and in return, we'll stop hunting you. And if I refuse," Armand's expression hardened, "then we'll kill you. Not today, perhaps not this month, but eventually. And we'll kill everyone in the Lumiere. We'll dismantle your organization piece by piece until there's nothing left. You've been lucky so far, Jean-Baptiste, but luck runs out." I considered the offer. Part of me was tempted, not by the power, but by the chance to end the constant running, the fear, the loss. I was tired, so very tired, but I remembered Marguerite, dying without revealing our secrets. I remembered Thomas, killed in Vienna. I remembered all the others who had sacrificed everything to resist the Brotherhood's vision of enlightened tyranny. "No," I said, "I won't join you, and I won't stop fighting you." Armand sighed. "I thought you might say that. It's a shame. You would have been useful." He stood to leave, then paused. "One more thing. You think you've hurt us by exposing us to Napoleon. You haven't. Napoleon is a temporary inconvenience. He'll be gone in a decade, maybe less, but the Brotherhood will endure. We always do, because we understand something you don't. History is not shaped by ideals or principles. It's shaped by power, and we have more power than you can imagine." "Power without conscience is tyranny," I said, "and conscience without power is irrelevant," Armand countered. "Goodbye, Jean-Baptiste. I hope you survive long enough to see that I was right." He left, and I sat alone in the tavern, trying to decide what to do next. I could not stay in France. I could not return to Hamburg. The Brotherhood would be watching. I needed to disappear completely, to find a place where even the Brotherhood could not reach me. But I also knew that Armand was right about one thing: the Brotherhood would endure. It had survived the terror, survived Napoleon's purges, survived everything we had thrown at it. Because it was not just an organization, it was an idea, a method, a way of operating that could be adapted to any era, any government, any crisis. We could not destroy it, but perhaps we could contain it. Perhaps we could ensure that its crimes were documented, that its methods were understood, that future generations would know to watch for its influence. That would have to be enough. I made it to England and spent the next several years in London, working with the remnants of the Lumière to continue documenting the Brotherhood's operations. Napoleon's empire rose and fell, just as Armand had predicted. The Congress of Vienna redrew the map of Europe. The old monarchies were restored, and the revolutionary era came to an end. And through it all, the Brotherhood endured, adapting to each new regime, embedding itself in each new government, continuing its patient work of accumulating power and shaping history. But so did we. The Lumière survived, smaller and more cautious, but still dedicated to bearing witness. We documented, we exposed when we could, we warned when we dared. We were not heroes. We were not even particularly effective. But we were there, watching, remembering, refusing to let the Brotherhood's crimes be forgotten. And that, I came to understand, was the only victory we could hope for. Not defeating the Brotherhood, but ensuring that someone knew the truth. That someone remembered, even if that someone was just me. The Lumière's operations between 1801 and 1804 taught me that fighting the Brotherhood required becoming uncomfortably similar to it. We could not match their resources or their reach, but we could adopt their methods: compartmentalization, coded communications, strategic manipulation of information. The difference, I told myself, was that we used these methods defensively, to protect rather than to control. But the line between defense and offense, between protection and manipulation, was thinner than I wanted to admit. One of our most successful operations came in 1802, when we learned that the Brotherhood was planning to assassinate a French general who had become too independent, too popular with his troops, too much of a potential threat to their carefully managed political landscape. The general, I will not name him, as his descendants still live, had no idea he was being targeted. He trusted his staff, his security, his position. We could not warn him directly. He would not have believed us. And even if he had no way to protect himself against an organization he did not know existed. Instead, we had to disrupt the assassination indirectly by creating circumstances that would make it impossible to execute. Danton identified the likely assassin, a Brotherhood operative embedded in the general's household staff. Sophie created a scandal involving the operative's supposed affair with another servant, forcing him to be dismissed before he could act. I forged documents suggesting that the general was being watched by Napoleon's secret police, making any assassination attempt too risky. Thomas leaked information to a journalist about suspicious activities around the general's residence, creating public attention that made a quiet kill impossible. The assassination was postponed, then canceled. The general lived another 15 years, dying of natural causes in his bed. He never knew how close he had come to death, or that a group of people he had never met had saved his life. It was satisfying work, but it was also exhausting and dangerous. Every operation risked exposure. Every success made the Brotherhood more determined to find us. And we were losing people. In 1803, we lost Sophie. She was captured in Vienna while trying to extract a former Brotherhood member who wanted to defect. The Brotherhood made an example of her, leaving her body in a public square with a note: "This is what happens to those who betray the enlightened order." It was a message to us and to anyone else who might consider resistance. Danton wanted revenge. He proposed assassinating a Brotherhood council member, setting our own example, showing that we could strike back. I refused, not because I thought it was morally wrong. I had long since lost the luxury of moral certainty, but because it was strategically foolish. We were not strong enough to fight the Brotherhood directly. Our only advantage was that they had to expend resources to find us, resources that could otherwise be used for their operations. If we started killing council members, we would become their primary focus and they would destroy us. So we just accept Sophie's death? Anton demanded. We do nothing? We do what we've always done, I said. We document. We are exposed. We disrupt. And we survive long enough to ensure that the truth is preserved. The truth, Anton spat. What good is truth if no one believes it? If no one acts on it? He left the Lumiere shortly after that conversation. I never saw him again, but I heard rumors years later that he had been killed in Spain, fighting in the guerrilla war against Napoleon's occupation. Perhaps he found the direct action he craved. Perhaps he found the death he seemed to be seeking. I do not know. What I do know is that his departure left us weaker at precisely the moment when the Brotherhood was becoming stronger. Napoleon's rise had initially seemed like an opportunity. Here was a man who valued merit over birth, who had no patience for secret societies or shadow networks, who wanted absolute control over his empire. The Brotherhood had helped create him, but they had also created a monster they could not fully control. But by 1804, it was clear that Napoleon and the Brotherhood had reached accommodation. He would tolerate their presence if they served his interests. They would support his rule if it created the conditions for their own expansion. It was a marriage of convenience between two forms of authoritarianism, and it made both more dangerous. The Brotherhood adapted to Napoleon's empire with remarkable speed. They embedded themselves in his administration, his military, his diplomatic corps. They used his conquests to expand their network across Europe. They exploited his legal reforms to create new mechanisms of control. And they learned from his example, becoming more centralized, more hierarchical, more efficient. The organization I had joined in 1784 had been a loose network of autonomous cells, coordinated through personal relationships and shared ideology. The organization that emerged under Napoleon was something different, a disciplined hierarchy with clear chains of command, standardized procedures, and systematic methods for recruitment, training, and operations. It was, in short, becoming a modern intelligence service, and that made it far more dangerous than the revolutionary conspiracy it had been. I saw this evolution clearly in the documents we intercepted in 1805. The Brotherhood had created a training program for new recruits, complete with manuals, examinations, and performance evaluations. They had developed standardized methods for infiltrating organizations, manipulating individuals, and executing operations. They had even created a system for evaluating the effectiveness of their interventions, measuring outcomes against objectives, learning from failures. They were professionalizing conspiracy. "This is worse than I thought," Thomas said when we reviewed the documents in our Hamburg safe house. "They're not just adapting to survive, they're evolving into something more sophisticated, more capable. In another generation, they'll be unstoppable." "They're already unstoppable," I said. "We're not trying to stop them. We're trying to understand them well enough to warn future generations." "And you think future generations will listen? You think they'll believe that a secret organization has been manipulating history for centuries?" "I think they'll have the evidence. What they do with it is their choice." It was a bleak philosophy, born of years of futility and loss. But it was all I had. The encounter with Armand in Calais in 1804 crystallized everything I had learned about the Brotherhood's evolution. His offer to rejoin was not just about the Brotherhood's new approach to defectors. Instead of simply killing everyone who left, they were trying to reclaim those who had proven themselves capable. It was more efficient, more pragmatic, more in line with their new professional methods. And it was more insidious, because it meant that leaving the Brotherhood was not enough. You had to actively resist, had to make yourself more trouble than you were worth, had to ensure that killing you was easier than trying to convert you. I made that choice in Calais, and I knew it meant I would be hunted for the rest of my life. But I also knew that Armand's final words, about power being more important than conscience, revealed the fundamental flaw in the Brotherhood's philosophy. They had spent decades accumulating power, embedding themselves in institutions, manipulating events. But power without purpose, without moral foundation, without accountability, inevitably corrupts those who wield it. The Brotherhood had started with noble goals: reason over superstition, merit over birth, progress over tradition. But in pursuing those goals through secret manipulation and ruthless pragmatism, They had become exactly what they claimed to oppose. They had become an unaccountable elite, convinced of their own superiority, willing to sacrifice anyone and everyone for their vision of enlightened order. They had become tyrants, and like all tyrants, they would eventually fall. The only question was how much damage they would do before that happened. My years in London, from 1805 to 1815, were a study in diminishing returns. The Lumière continued to operate, but we were shadows of what we had been. Most of our original members were dead or had disappeared. Our operations were smaller, more cautious, and less effective. We were documenting the Brotherhood's activities, but we had largely given up on disrupting them. We had become archivists of our own defeat. Napoleon's fall in 1815 briefly gave us hope. Perhaps the Brotherhood, so closely tied to his empire, would fall with him. Perhaps the restoration of the old monarchies would disrupt their networks, force them to rebuild, give us an opening. But the Congress of Vienna proved how naive that hope was. The Brotherhood was there, embedded in every delegation, whispering in every negotiation, shaping the new European order just as they had shaped the revolutionary one. They had learned to work with any regime, any ideology, any system. They were not tied to Napoleon or to revolution or to any particular political form. They were tied only to power itself. And power endured, regardless of who nominally held it. I watched from London as Europe was redrawn, as the revolutionary era was officially ended, as the old order was restored with new mechanisms of control. And I understood that the Brotherhood had won. Not completely, not permanently, but decisively. They had survived the revolution they had helped create. They had survived the empire they had helped build. And they would survive whatever came next. Because they had learned the ultimate lesson, that history is not shaped by ideals or principles, but by patient manipulation of the systems that govern human behavior. And they were very, very patient. I am writing this in the year 1832, 48 years after I took the oath that changed my life. I am 74 years old, living under yet another false name in a cottage on the coast of Cornwall. My hands shake as I write, whether from age or from the weight of memory, I cannot say. But the story must be finished. The testimony must be complete, because I am the last one left. The Lumière dissolved in 1820, not through violence or betrayal, but through simple attrition. The members grew old, died, or simply gave up. The younger generation had no interest in fighting shadows from the revolutionary era. They had their own concerns, their own battles. The Brotherhood had become, to them, a conspiracy theory, a paranoid fantasy of old men who could not accept that history had moved on. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps I am just a paranoid old man, seeing patterns where none exist, attributing to conspiracy what can be explained by ordinary human ambition and folly. But I have seen too much, documented too much, to dismiss it all as coincidence. The Brotherhood still exists. I know this because I still see its fingerprints on events, still recognize its methods in the manipulations that shape European politics. It is more subtle now, more patient, more careful, but it is there, working in the shadows, pursuing its eternal goal of accumulating power while remaining invisible. And no one believes me. I have tried over the years to publish the archive. I have approached newspapers, publishers, and historians. Some dismiss me as a madman. Others are intrigued, but ultimately decide the story is too controversial, too unbelievable, too dangerous. A few have expressed interest, only to suddenly change their minds after mysterious visits or veiled threats. The Brotherhood, it seems, still has enough reach to suppress the truth. Or perhaps the truth is simply too disturbing for people to accept. It is easier to believe in great men and popular movements than to accept that history is shaped by invisible hands, that revolutions are manufactured, that the arc of progress is guided by those who benefit from chaos. So I write this account not for publication, but for preservation. I write it so that someday, when the time is right, when people are ready to hear it, the truth will be available. I write it as testimony, as warning, as evidence that the Brotherhood existed and that its crimes were real. And I write it as confession, because I was part of it. I helped engineer the financial crisis that led to the revolution. I helped manipulate events during the terror. I have blood on my hands, however much I have tried to wash it off through decades of resistance. I cannot undo what I did. I can only bear witness to it. Let me tell you what I have learned in 48 years of watching the Brotherhood and fighting it. Let me share the lessons that have been purchased with so many lives, so much suffering, so much futile resistance. First, the Brotherhood is not unique. It is one manifestation of a pattern that repeats throughout history. The pattern of small groups of people who believe they are enlightened enough, intelligent enough, ruthless enough to guide humanity toward a better future. Sometimes they call themselves brotherhoods or lodges or committees. Sometimes they operate through governments or churches or corporations. But the pattern is always the same: a conviction that they know better than the masses, that ordinary people cannot be trusted with their own governance, that enlightened manipulation is justified by the greater good it supposedly serves. The Brotherhood that I joined in 1784 claimed to be building a republic of reason. But reason, divorced from compassion and accountability, becomes just another form of tyranny. The terror was not a betrayal of the Brotherhood's principles. It was the logical conclusion of those principles, the inevitable result of believing that you have the right to reshape society according to your vision, regardless of the human cost. Second, secret power is inherently corrupt. The Brotherhood operated in shadows because it knew that its methods could not withstand public scrutiny. We told ourselves that secrecy was necessary for effectiveness, that we had to remain hidden to avoid being stopped by reactionary forces. But secrecy also meant no accountability, no checks on our power, no mechanism for correcting our mistakes. We became accountable only to ourselves, and we convinced ourselves that our intentions justified our actions. This is the great danger of conspiracy. Not that it might succeed, but that it removes the conspirators from the normal constraints of morality and law. When you operate in secret, when you answer to no one, when you convince yourself that you are serving a higher purpose, you can justify anything. Murder becomes necessary elimination. Manipulation becomes strategic guidance. Tyranny becomes enlightened rule. The Brotherhood was not evil in the sense of deliberately seeking to cause suffering. It was evil in the sense of believing that it had the right to cause suffering in pursuit of its goals. And that belief, that conviction of righteousness, made it far more dangerous than any ordinary criminal enterprise. Third, revolutions cannot be controlled. This is perhaps the most important lesson, the one the Brotherhood has never fully learned. You can start a revolution, you can guide its early stages, you can even shape its initial direction. But once the forces of popular rage and utopian hope are unleashed, they take on a life of their own. They exceed the intentions of their creators. They devour those who thought they could ride the tiger. The French Revolution was supposed to create a rational republic governed by enlightened principles. Instead, it created the terror, then Napoleon's dictatorship, then the restoration of monarchy. The Brotherhood thought it could control each stage, but it was swept along by forces it had helped unleash but could not contain. This is the paradox of revolutionary manipulation. The more successful you are at creating chaos, the less control you have over what emerges from that chaos. The Brotherhood learned this lesson in France, but I suspect it has forgotten it again. Because the temptation to shape history is too great, the conviction that this time will be different, too seductive. Fourth, resistance is possible but costly. The Lumiere proved that the Brotherhood could be fought, that its operations could be disrupted, that its crimes could be exposed. But we also proved that such resistance requires sacrifice. Most of the people I worked with are dead, killed by the Brotherhood or by the chaos we were trying to prevent. Those who survived did so by abandoning the fight, by accepting that some battles cannot be won. I do not regret the resistance. I regret the cost. I regret that so many good people died for such limited victories. I regret that the Brotherhood endures, while those who fought it are forgotten. But I do not regret the attempt, because the alternative, accepting the Brotherhood's vision, allowing it to operate unchallenged, would have been worse. Fifth, the truth matters even when it changes nothing. This is the hardest lesson, the one I am still struggling to accept. I have spent decades documenting the Brotherhood's crimes, preserving evidence, trying to ensure that the truth would be known. And what has it accomplished? The Brotherhood still exists. Its methods are still used. History is still shaped by invisible hands. But the truth matters anyway. It matters because people have a right to know how they are being manipulated. It matters because future generations deserve to understand their past, even if that understanding is painful. It matters because bearing witness is a moral obligation, regardless of whether anyone is listening. I will die soon. Perhaps this year, perhaps next, but soon. And when I die, this account will be all that remains of the Lumière, of the resistance, of the attempt to hold the Brotherhood accountable. I have arranged for it to be preserved, hidden in a place where it might survive the decades or centuries until someone is ready to hear it. Will anyone believe it? I do not know. Will it change anything? Probably not, but it will exist, and that will have to be enough. I want to tell you that I have made peace with what I did, that I have found some kind of redemption or forgiveness. But I have not. I still see the faces of the people who died because of my actions. I still hear the screams from the prisons. I still feel the weight of every name I forwarded to the Revolutionary Tribunal, every manipulation I executed, every life I helped destroy. I was 26 when I took the oath, young and ambitious and convinced that I was serving a higher purpose. I am 74 now, old and tired and certain only that I was wrong. The Brotherhood promised enlightenment and delivered tyranny. It promised reason and delivered madness. It promised a better world and delivered only blood and ash. And yet, I understand why I joined. I understand the appeal of believing that you can shape history, that you can be part of something larger than yourself, that your actions matter in ways that ordinary life does not allow. I understand the seduction of secret knowledge, of being one of the enlightened few who see the patterns others miss. That understanding does not excuse what I did, but it helps me comprehend how ordinary people, clerks and merchants and physicians, can become instruments of atrocity. We do not start as monsters. We start as people who want to matter, who want to make a difference, who want to believe that we are serving something greater than ourselves. And then step by step, compromise by compromise, we become something we never intended to be. If there is a lesson in my life, it is this: beware of those who claim to be building a better world through secret means. Beware of organizations that demand absolute loyalty and operate in shadows. Beware of ideologies that justify present suffering for future utopia. And above all, beware of your own ambition, your own desire to be significant, because that desire can be weaponized by those who understand how to exploit it. The Brotherhood understood this. It recruited people like me, intelligent, undervalued, ambitious, and gave us purpose and power. And in return, it made us complicit in crimes we would never have committed on our own. That is its genius and its evil. It does not force people to do terrible things. It convinces them that terrible things are necessary, even noble. I have one final story to tell, one final piece of evidence to add to this account. In 1825, 7 years ago, I received a letter. It was unsigned, but I recognized the handwriting. Armand, the council member who had offered me a place in the new Brotherhood back in 1804. The letter was brief. You were right to refuse. The Brotherhood has become what you feared it would be. I am leaving as you did. I wanted you to know that your resistance mattered, even if it failed. Some of us were watching. Some of us learned, and some of us chose differently because of what you did. That is worth something. I do not know if the letter was genuine or a manipulation, one final attempt to draw me out or to ease my conscience. But I choose to believe it was real. I choose to believe that my decades of resistance, however futile they seemed, changed something. That somewhere, someone saw what the Brotherhood was becoming and chose to walk away. That the testimony I have preserved might someday help others make the same choice. It is not much, it is not victory, but it is something. I am tired now, tired of remembering, tired of writing, tired of carrying this weight. But the account is nearly complete. The testimony is nearly finished, and soon I will be able to rest. To whoever reads this, whenever you read it, I offer this final warning. The Brotherhood still exists. It may call itself something different. It may have adapted its methods to new times and new technologies. But the pattern endures. The pattern of secret power, of enlightened manipulation, of people who believe they have the right to shape history from the shadows. Watch for it. Question it. Resist it. And if you cannot resist it, at least bear witness to it. Document its crimes. Preserve the evidence. Ensure that future generations know the truth, even if that truth is disturbing and complicated and challenges comfortable narratives about progress and enlightenment. That is all I can ask. That is all I have done. I was Jean-Baptiste Mercier, clerk in the royal bureaucracy, member of the Brute Brotherhood, architect of revolution, and finally, witness to the crimes I helped commit. I took an oath in 1784 that bound me to a conspiracy I did not fully understand. I broke that oath in 1794 when I could no longer stomach what we had become. And I have spent the rest of my life trying to atone for what I did, knowing that atonement is impossible. This is my testimony. This is my warning. This is my confession. May it serve some purpose, however small, in the long struggle against those who would reshape the world according to their vision, regardless of the human cost. May someone, someday, learn from my mistakes, and may the Brotherhood's shadow, which has darkened so much of history, finally be brought into the light. I am done. The account is complete, and I am at last ready to rest. The cottage on the Cornish coast is quiet now. The old man who lived here died in his sleep 3 weeks ago. The local vicar conducted a simple funeral, attended by no one, for a man whose real name no one knew. His possessions were few, some clothes, a small amount of money, and a locked chest that the vicar assumed contained personal papers. The chest sits now in the vicar's study, awaiting someone to claim it. Inside are hundreds of pages of closely written testimony, documents in multiple languages, maps and diagrams, and lists of names. The vicar has glanced at them but found them incomprehensible, the ravings of a paranoid mind or perhaps an elaborate work of fiction. He will store the chest in the church attic, where it will sit for decades, forgotten and gathering dust. And there it will wait, this testimony of conspiracy and resistance, of revolution and terror, of the shadow that shaped an age. Waiting for someone to find it, waiting for someone to believe it, waiting for someone to understand that the patterns of history are not always what they seem, that the forces that shape our world are not always visible, and that the price of enlightenment, when pursued without conscience, is always paid in blood. The testimony waits, and the Brotherhood endures. The years between 1820 and 1832 were the loneliest of my life. The Lumière had dissolved. My few remaining contacts had either died or lost interest. I was living under my fourth false identity in a cottage on the Cornish coast, spending my days writing this account and my nights wondering if anyone would ever read it. But loneliness brought clarity. Distance from the immediate struggle allowed me to see patterns I had missed while I was living through them. And I came to understand that the Brotherhood was not an aberration, not a unique evil, but a manifestation of something deeper and more persistent in human nature. The desire to control, the conviction that we know better than others, the willingness to use any means to achieve what we believe are noble ends. These are not unique to the Brotherhood. They are universal human temptations, and they appear in every era, every culture, every movement that claims to be building a better world. The Brotherhood was simply more honest about it than most. They did not pretend that their manipulation was for the benefit of those being manipulated. They did not claim to be serving the people while serving themselves. They acknowledged, at least internally, that they were pursuing power for its own sake, that their vision of enlightened order was really just their desire to be the ones in control. In that sense, they were less hypocritical than the revolutionaries who claimed to be liberating the people while sending thousands to the guillotine. Less hypocritical than Napoleon, who claimed to be spreading the principles of the revolution while crowning himself emperor. Less hypocritical than the restored monarchies, who claimed to be defending tradition while using modern police states to maintain control. The Brotherhood was evil, yes, but it was an honest evil, and that made it in some ways more dangerous than the dishonest evils that surrounded it. I spent months in 1828 trying to understand why the Brotherhood had become what it was. I reviewed all the documents I had preserved, all the testimonies I had collected, all the operations I had witnessed or participated in. And I identified 3 critical moments when the organization had made choices that set it on its path. The first was sometime in the late 17th century, when the Brotherhood decided that Enlightenment principles, reason, science, progress, could be weaponized. They saw, that ideas could be more powerful than armies, that controlling what people believed was more effective than controlling what they did. And they began systematically using Enlightenment rhetoric to justify their manipulations, claiming that they were serving reason and progress when they were really serving their own power. The second was during the French Revolution, when they discovered that chaos could be manufactured and controlled. Before France, the Brotherhood had worked primarily through existing institutions, manipulating them from within. But the revolution taught them that they could destroy institutions, create crises, and then shape what emerged from the rubble. It was a more dangerous approach, but also more effective, and it became their preferred method. The third was during the Napoleonic era, when they professionalized their operations. They stopped being a loose network of ideologues and became a disciplined organization with systematic methods, clear hierarchies, and measurable objectives. They stopped being a conspiracy and became an institution. And institutions, once established, develop their own logic, their own imperatives, their own reasons for existing that have nothing to do with their original purposes. These three transformations, weaponizing ideas, manufacturing chaos, and institutionalizing conspiracy, turned the Brotherhood from a group of Enlightenment enthusiasts into the organization that I had fled. And I realized that these same transformations could happen to any group, any movement, any organization that believed it had the right to shape history from the shadows. The Lumière had been at risk of the same evolution. We had started as witnesses determined only to document the Brotherhood's crimes. But we gradually became operatives, actively interfering with their plans, using manipulation and deception to achieve our goals. If we had survived longer, if we had grown larger, we might have become exactly what we were fighting against. That realization was both humbling and terrifying, because it meant that the problem was not just the Brotherhood. The problem was the human tendency to believe that our ends justify our means, that our vision of the good justifies whatever methods we use to achieve it. And that tendency was universal. In 1830, I witnessed the July Revolution from my cottage in Cornwall, reading about it in newspapers that arrived weeks after the events. The Bourbon monarchy fell. Louis-Philippe became the citizen king. France had another revolution, another change of regime, another promise of a better future. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that the Brotherhood was there, manipulating events, shaping outcomes, ensuring that whatever emerged from the revolution served their purposes. Because that was what they did. That was what they had always done. And that was what they would continue to do, long after I was dead. The knowledge was crushing. I had spent decades fighting them, documenting their crimes, warning them about their methods. And it had accomplished nothing. They were still there, still operating, still winning. But then I received Armand's letter, and everything changed. The letter arrived in January 1831, delivered by a courier who refused to say who had sent him. I recognized Armand's handwriting immediately, even though I had not seen it in nearly 30 years. My first instinct was to burn it unread. It was almost certainly a trap, a final attempt to draw me out. But curiosity overcame caution. I opened it. The letter was brief, as I mentioned earlier. But what I did not mention was the second page, which contained something I had never expected, an apology. "I have spent my life serving the Brotherhood," Armand wrote. "I believed in its mission, its methods, its vision of enlightened order. I helped build the organization that you fled. I defended its actions, justified its crimes, convinced myself that we were serving humanity's progress. But I was wrong. The Brotherhood has become exactly what we claim to oppose. It has become an end, existing only to perpetuate its own power, justifying any action as long as it serves organizational interests. We have stopped asking whether our interventions improve the world. We have stopped caring about the human cost of our operations. We have become machines, processing history according to our algorithms, indifferent to the suffering we cause. You saw this decades ago. You tried to warn us, and we tried to kill you for it. I am leaving the Brotherhood as you did. I do not expect forgiveness. I do not deserve it. But I wanted you to know that your resistance mattered, that your testimony, your documentation, your refusal to accept our justifications, all of it mattered, because it planted seeds of doubt that eventually grew into understanding. I am one of perhaps a dozen council members who have left in the past decade. We are not enough to destroy the organization, but we are enough to weaken it, to create uncertainty, to force it to expend resources on internal security that could otherwise be used for operations. Your life's work was not futile. It was essential, and I wanted you to know that before you die. I read that letter 100 times. I analyzed every word, looking for deception, for manipulation, for the trap I was certain must be there. But I could not find it, and eventually I chose to believe it was genuine. Not because I trusted Armand, not because I thought one defection or a dozen would significantly damage the Brotherhood, but because I needed to believe that resistance mattered, that bearing witness had value, that the decades I had spent fighting and documenting and warning had accomplished something, however small. It was perhaps self-deception, but it was a necessary self-deception, because without it, I could not finish this account. I could not complete the testimony. I could not preserve the evidence that might, someday, help others understand what the Brotherhood was and how to resist it. And so I chose to believe. I chose to hope. I chose to think that perhaps in some small way, I had made a difference. The final months of my life have been devoted to completing this account and arranging for its preservation. I have made copies, hidden in different locations, with instructions for their eventual discovery. I have encrypted the most sensitive information with keys that will only be found by someone who knows what to look for. I have created a trail of breadcrumbs that might, if someone is clever and persistent enough, lead them to the full archive. Will anyone follow that trail? I do not know. Will anyone believe what they find? I cannot say. Will it make any difference? Probably not, but it will exist, and that will have to be enough. I want to end this testimony with practical advice for anyone who might read it, anyone who might encounter the Brotherhood or organizations like it, anyone who might find themselves in the position I was in when I took the oath in 1784. First, be skeptical of anyone who claims to be building a better world through secret means. Legitimate reform does not require secrecy. Genuine progress does not need to hide its methods. If an organization insists on operating in shadows, ask yourself why. Ask yourself who benefits from that secret. And ask yourself whether you are comfortable being part of something that cannot withstand public scrutiny. Second, pay attention to the gap between rhetoric and action. The Brotherhood spoke constantly about reason, enlightenment, progress, liberation, but their actions were about control, manipulation, and the accumulation of power. When an organization's actions consistently contradict its stated principles, believe the actions, not the principles. Third, understand that small compromises lead to large betrayals. I did not join the Brotherhood intending to help engineer the terror. I joined thinking I would make small contributions to necessary reforms, but each small action made the next one easier. Each compromise made the next one seem less significant. And before I understood what was happening, I was complicit in mass murder. The path to atrocity is paved with incremental steps, each one justifiable in isolation, each one leading inexorably to the next. Resist the first step, because once you start down that path, it becomes progressively harder to turn back. Fourth, documentation matters. The Brotherhood survived for centuries, partly because no one documented its operations systematically. No one preserved the evidence. No one created a comprehensive record that could be used to understand its methods and resist them. If you encounter conspiracy, manipulation, or abuse of power, document it. Preserve the evidence. Create a record that will outlast you. Even if that record is never used, even if no one believes it, even if it seems futile, do it anyway. Because you never know when someone will need that evidence, when the patterns you documented will help someone else understand what they are facing. Fifth, accept that you cannot win, but fight anyway. I spent decades trying to destroy the Brotherhood, and I failed. They are still there. They are still operating. They are still winning. But my resistance was not futile, even though it did not achieve its ultimate goal, because it created costs, forced adaptations, planted doubts, and preserved evidence. Sometimes resistance is its own justification. Sometimes bearing witness is enough. Sometimes the only victory available is refusing to surrender, refusing to accept, refusing to forget. And finally, remember that the patterns of power are persistent but not inevitable. The Brotherhood endures, Because people allow it to endure, because they accept its manipulations, because they do not question the official narratives, because they do not demand accountability from those who shape their world. But people can change, societies can evolve, systems can be reformed. The Brotherhood is powerful, but it is not omnipotent. It can be resisted, it can be exposed, it can be limited. Not easily, not quickly, not without cost, but it can be done. And that possibility, however remote, is worth preserving, worth fighting for, worth dying for if necessary. I am dying now. Not dramatically, not violently, but simply wearing out. My heart is failing, my hands shake, my vision blurs. I have perhaps weeks left, perhaps days, but this account is complete. The testimony is finished, the evidence is preserved, and I can rest knowing that I did what I could, that I bore witness, that I resisted, that I refused to let the Brotherhood's crimes be forgotten or forgiven. It is not redemption. Nothing can redeem what I did during the Terror. But it is something, and something is better than nothing. To whoever finds this, use it well. Learn from my mistakes. Understand the patterns I have documented, and resist, in whatever way you can, the forces that would shape your world from the shadows. The Brotherhood endures, but so does the possibility of resistance. So does the power of truth. So does the human capacity to choose conscience over convenience, principle over power, witness over silence. Choose well. The future depends on it. You have just read a testimony that was never meant to be published. A chronicle that was hidden for nearly 2 centuries, waiting for the moment when the world was ready to hear it. Jean-Baptiste Mercier's account of the Brute Brotherhood and the French Revolution is one story among many, one thread in a vast tapestry of secret societies, hidden manipulations, and the invisible hands that have shaped our world. But it is not the only story. The Brotherhood that Mercier documented did not end with his death in 1832. It evolved, adapted, and continued its work across centuries and continents. Its methods changed with the times, but its fundamental approach remained constant. Operate in shadows, manipulate from within, accumulate power while remaining invisible. The French Revolution was just one chapter in a much longer history, one operation in an ongoing campaign to reshape civilization according to the vision of those who believe they know better than the masses. And Mercier was not the only one who resisted. Throughout history, there have been other defectors, whistleblowers, witnesses who saw what the Brotherhood was doing and chose to document it, to resist it, to warn future generations. Their testimonies have been suppressed, dismissed as conspiracy theories, or simply forgotten. But they exist, hidden in archives and attics, waiting to be discovered. We are dedicated to uncovering these hidden histories, to bringing to light the testimonies that have been buried, to revealing the patterns of power and manipulation that have shaped our world. Shadow of the Throne is the first installment in the Brute Brotherhood, a series of historical thriller narratives that trace the Brotherhood's influence across different eras and revolutions. Each narrative is a standalone story, told through the eyes of someone who was there, someone who participated in or witnessed the Brotherhood's operations. Each one reveals a different aspect of how secret power operates, how revolutions are manufactured, how history is shaped by forces that prefer to remain hidden. The Brute Brotherhood is just one series among many that we produce at Unleashing Great Minds. All of our content shares the same commitment to go deeper than surface narratives, to ask uncomfortable questions, to reveal the patterns and mechanisms of power that shape our world. We do not traffic in simple conspiracy theories or paranoid fantasies. We deal in documented evidence, careful research, and narratives that are grounded in historical reality, even as they challenge conventional interpretations. We believe that understanding how power really works is essential to maintaining any kind of meaningful freedom. We believe that the patterns of manipulation and control that shaped the past are still operating in the present, adapted to new technologies and new contexts, but fundamentally unchanged. And we believe that bearing witness to these patterns, documenting them, understanding them, is a moral obligation. The Brotherhood, in all its forms and iterations, has operated for centuries on the assumption that ordinary people cannot handle the truth, that they need to be guided and manipulated for their own good, that power is best exercised in secret. We reject that assumption. We believe that people have the right to know how they are being manipulated, that transparency is essential to accountability, that the patterns of power must be exposed and understood if they are ever challenged. Jean-Baptiste Mercier spent decades documenting the Brotherhood's crimes, knowing that his testimony might never be heard. The Brotherhood endures. But so does the resistance. So does the testimony. So does the commitment to truth, however uncomfortable that truth might be. Join us. Be a part of the community that refuses to accept official narratives at face value, that insists on understanding how power really works, that believes that knowledge is the first step toward meaningful resistance. Subscribe today.